Think back to the last time you walked into a high-status room and felt the temperature hit your skin before anyone said a word. Not dramatic. Just real. The kind of room where people sit like they already decided what's true. The kind of room where chairs don't squeak because nobody fidgets. Where the table is too polished, the lighting is too clean, and the silence isn't empty, it's watching. Now rewind to the exact moment it started going wrong. Not the story you told yourself afterward. Not the explanation you rehearsed in the shower later. The actual moment. The half-second where you felt that tiny tightening around your ribs. The micro-drop in your stomach when someone higher up asked a simple question, and your brain translated it into something heavier. Why'd you do it that way? And before you even answered, your body made a decision. You started to explain yourself. You can feel it if you replay it honestly. Your voice shifts into a slightly faster register. You add extra context that wasn't asked for. You start laying out your reasoning like you're trying to build a courtroom case, piece by piece, hoping the logic will protect you. And the deeper you go, the more you sense it, you're not gaining respect. You're paying for it. Because in a high-status room, explanation isn't neutral. It's a signal. It tells the room what role you think you're in. And the room is always listening for that. Most people don't realize this because they confuse being understood with being safe. You were taught that clarity wins. That if you just communicate well enough, if you show your thinking, demonstrate your diligence, prove you considered the risks, people will respect you. That belief makes sense. It makes sense because in normal rooms, it works. In peer rooms, explanation builds trust. In collaborative rooms, explaining yourself is transparency, and transparency is currency. In rooms where people are genuinely trying to solve something with you, adding context helps. It's responsible. It's team-oriented. It's clean. So when you step into a high-status room, you carry the same rule in with you. Your brain thinks, same game, higher stakes. But it's not the same game. High-status rooms don't primarily run on information. They run on frame. They're not just evaluating what you did. They're evaluating what you believe about what you did. They're tracking whether you move like the author of your decisions, or like a person hoping their decision gets approved after the fact. That's the hidden rule nobody says out loud. The moment you start explaining yourself to buy legitimacy, you've already handed legitimacy away. Here's what's actually happening in that moment when you over-explain. The question hits you, and your nervous system hears, defend your right to be here. Even if nobody said that. Even if the person asking is calm. Even if the words are polite. Your body reacts before your intellect can frame it. Your throat goes a little dry. Your palms warm. Your mind starts scanning for the safest path through the conversation, like it's trying to avoid stepping on a landmine you can't see. So you start building a bridge made of reasons. But in a high-status room, reasons can sound like pleading. Not because you're weak. Because the room's status logic is different. High status doesn't need to prove itself in real time. It assumes it's valid. It speaks from a place that doesn't require permission. That's why the people with the most gravity can say less and still be believed. When you explain yourself too early, too much, or too fast, you unintentionally do something specific. You accept the premise that your decision is on trial. And once you accept that premise, the room shifts. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Subtly. A tiny lean back. A quick glance between two people. Someone stops taking notes. Someone's mouth presses into that neutral line that isn't quite disapproval, but isn't curiosity either. You can feel it when it happens. The air thins. The room becomes a little more vertical. You're down there presenting, and they're up there evaluating. That's why the title is not a motivational phrase. It's a power rule. Never explain yourself in a high-status room. Not because you should be mysterious. Not because you should be arrogant. Not because you should dominate. Because explaining yourself, in the wrong way, at the wrong time, in the wrong room, turns you from a decision maker into a defendant. And once the room sees you as a defendant, they start asking questions the way prosecutors do. Not to learn. To test. To see if you wobble. To see if you chase their approval. Picture this. You're in a conference room that looks like it was designed to remove warmth. The lights are bright but not soft. The glass wall reflects just enough that you can see your own outline if you shift your gaze. The table is long, the kind that makes conversations feel like they have a front and a back. On the far side sits a senior leader. Not angry. Not friendly. Controlled. Their hands are folded in front of them like they're holding stillness in place. Two other people sit slightly behind, angled toward them, as if the room's gravity is centered there. You're across the table. Your laptop is open, but you've stopped touching it. Your notes are ready, but you're suddenly aware of your own breathing. You can hear the hum of the air conditioning and the faint click of someone's pen. You deliver your update. It's solid. You're on track. You made a call last week that moved things forward. It wasn't reckless. It was a choice. The senior leader looks at you for a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes don't narrow. They don't widen. They just stay on you, like they're waiting to see what you do under pressure. Then they say, evenly, "Why did you choose that approach instead of the other one?" Not aggressive. But you can hear a tone detail in it, not curiosity, assessment. It's the kind of why that's shaped like a doorway. And you're supposed to walk through it. Your body reacts before your mind does. That small, physical sensation hits, a slight tightening at the base of your throat, like your voice has to squeeze through a narrower space. Your stomach drops half an inch. Your shoulders want to rise, but you force them down. In your head, the calculation starts instantly. If I answer short, they'll think I didn't consider the risks. If I don't justify it, they'll assume it was a guess. If I sound too confident, I'll look arrogant. If I sound too careful, I'll look weak. You can feel how fast your mind is moving. It's not thinking about the decision anymore. It's thinking about what they think of you thinking about the decision. It's a hall of mirrors, and it happens in about 3 seconds. Most people choose the same response here. They start explaining. They say something like, "Yeah, so we considered the other option, and the reason we didn't go with it is because there were a few constraints, and also based on what we saw last quarter, we felt like." You hear your own voice speeding up, trying to lay down context like sandbags against a rising flood. And immediately, something shifts. The senior leader's posture changes slightly. They lean back just a touch, as if they've been given confirmation, you're in defense mode. One of the people behind them glances down at their notebook, not to write, but to avoid eye contact for a second. The pen clicking stops. The room gets quieter, not because they're listening harder, but because they've stopped participating. You keep going, because now you feel the silence, and silence feels like disapproval. So the thinking was, and also, if you look at the numbers, and we ran a quick analysis, and the team agreed that. Your voice tries to sound composed, but you can hear the slight upward tilt at the end of your sentences, like you're unconsciously asking for approval. You don't mean to. It just happens when your nervous system is trying to be accepted. The senior leader interrupts gently, almost kindly, "Okay. So you're saying you didn't have enough data for the other option? Now you're trapped. Because that's not what you said. That's not what you meant." But when you explain yourself too much, you give people room to summarize you incorrectly, and then you're forced to explain again just to correct the summary. You feel heat creep up your neck. You say, "Not exactly, what I mean is." And there it is. That phrase, "what I mean is." The sound of a person trying to regain control after losing frame. But here's what changes everything. Instead of explaining, you answer like an author. You slow down. Not theatrically. Just enough to let your body catch up with your mind. You let a full breath move through you. You look at them without shrinking. And you speak in one clean line. We chose it because it gets us the outcome we're accountable for, without introducing a dependency we can't control. Then you stop. 3 seconds of stillness. No extra justification. No backpedaling. No trying to be liked. Just a statement that carries a standard inside it: outcome, accountability, control. Now watch the senior leader. Their eyes shift slightly, not away from you, but deeper into processing. They don't lean back this time. They lean forward, almost imperceptibly, like the room re-engages. One of the other people picks up their pen again. Someone's mouth relaxes. Because you didn't accept the defendant role. You didn't refuse the question. You answered it. But you answered it from your frame, not theirs. If they want details, you can give details. But you give details as a second step, not as a plea. They ask, "What dependency?" And now, because the frame is stable, you can explain without explaining yourself. Option B: required approvals from 2 external teams. Our timeline can't afford that risk. If that changes, we revisit. Short. Clean. Conditional. No apology hidden inside it. The meeting continues. But something is different. They don't test you again in the same way. Not because you were aggressive. Not because you dominated. Because you communicated a signal that high-status rooms recognize immediately: you are not here to audition for legitimacy. You are here to execute against standards. That's the principle. Never explain yourself in a high-status room means this: don't talk like someone whose right to decide is negotiable. So here's the move, step by step, in a way you can actually use. When you get challenged in a high-status room, your first job is not to provide more information. Your first job is to hold frame. Frame is the invisible structure that tells the room what this conversation is. Is it an interrogation? Is it a collaboration? Is it a decision review? Is it a risk check? If you start explaining yourself immediately, you're silently saying, "This is an interrogation and I'm on trial." The room will happily accept that structure, because it gives them power for free. Instead, do this. Answer in one sentence that contains a standard. Not a justification. A standard. A standard sounds like outcome, constraint, principle, accountability, risk tolerance, timeline, ownership. We chose it because it reduces risk under our timeline. We chose it because it aligns with the metric we agreed to own. We chose it because we can control execution without depending on external approvals. That one sentence does 2 things at once. It answers the question, and it signals you're operating from a decision framework, not from fear. Then stop. Let the silence land. This is where most people fail. They answer, and then they keep talking because they're uncomfortable being watched. They try to fill the space so nobody can misunderstand them. But in high-status rooms, filling space often reads as insecurity. Silence, held calmly, reads as stability. If someone asks for more detail after that, you give it. But you give it in layers, not floods. You offer a second sentence that clarifies, not defends. Then you stop again. You're not withholding. You're pacing information like a person who expects to be listened to. Common mistake versus power correction is simple. The mistake, you respond to pressure by expanding. The correction, you respond to pressure by compressing. Compression is not being vague. It's being deliberate. It's the difference between, let me walk you through everything so you don't judge me, and, here's the reason, here's the boundary, and we move forward. Now here's the part that makes this dangerous if you misunderstand it. Never explaining yourself can become a costume people wear to look powerful. That's when it turns into arrogance, vagueness, and manipulation. That's when people start using short answers as a way to avoid accountability. That is not what you're doing. The ethical boundary is this: you don't withhold clarity to control people. You withhold self-defense to hold frame. If the room genuinely needs information to make a good decision, you provide it. If someone is confused, you clarify. If a risk is real, you surface it. But you do not trade away your authority by acting like your decisions require emotional permission. You're not trying to win dominance points. You're trying to communicate like a person who is accountable and grounded. Because that's what high-status rooms ultimately respect, not bravado, but stability. And knowing this rule isn't enough. Because the next layer is what happens when the room doesn't just question your decision, they question your right to have made it at all, using innocent language that hides a test inside it. 2. Watch the micro-shift after you add, because. Watch what happens the next time someone challenges you and you feel that reflex to earn your place with extra context. Not the obvious part, the words. The quieter part. The small physical change that hits right before you start justifying. That subtle forward lean. The way your hands move like they're trying to shape the air into something coherent. The way your voice gets slightly brighter, like you're offering reassurance. Now watch the room. Notice how attention behaves when you say the first clean sentence, and then how it behaves the moment you add the second sentence that starts with because. Because is supposed to be harmless, rational, mature, responsible. But in a high-status room, because often works like an invisible kneel. Not always. Not in every room. But in the rooms where status is part of the operating system, because can quietly tell everyone listening that you feel you need permission for the decision you already made. And people pick up on that faster than you think. They don't announce it. They don't glare. They don't smirk. They just move. A micro-shift in posture. A glance to someone else, not because they're bored, but because they're tracking, is this person stable? Or are they negotiating their own authority out loud? You can feel it when you've been on the wrong side of it. You start talking and it's like your words don't land on a surface anymore. They fall through the room instead of into it. You keep adding detail, hoping one more piece of context will make them nod. And the more you add, the more they look like they're waiting for you to finish. This is where most people get the rule wrong. They think the problem is talking too much. That's the symptom. The real problem is what you're doing with the talking. You're trying to convert skepticism into approval by supplying reasons fast enough that nobody can reject you. It makes sense why you do it. You were trained to believe that logic resolves tension. That if someone pushes back, the correct response is clarity. That if you can just show your reasoning, they'll see you're competent, careful, thoughtful. And in normal rooms, that's true. In normal rooms, because is a bridge. In high-status rooms, because is often a confession. I'm anxious you won't accept my authority unless I justify it. That's why it changes the energy. Because high-status rooms don't reward anxious competence. They reward anchored competence. Anchored competence sounds like this. Here's the decision. Here's the metric. Here's what would change it. Here's the next step. It doesn't over-apologize for existing. It doesn't audition. It doesn't beg to be understood. And here's the part nobody says out loud: when you explain too quickly, you train the room to keep asking for explanations. Not because they're evil. Because you're teaching them the relationship. You're teaching them that your decisions come with a receipt they can demand on command. So here's what's actually happening beneath the surface when because weakens you. In a high-status room, a challenge question is often not a request for information. It's a test of frame. A frame is what makes your words feel like they carry weight. When you answer a challenge with an explanation-first response, you accept their frame. You are on trial and must prove your reasoning. When you answer with a standard first response, you keep your frame. We are aligned on outcomes and constraints, and decisions follow from that. Same question. Completely different power dynamic. And you can watch it in real time if you're willing to see it. Because when you do it the old way, the room becomes your judge. When you do it the new way, the room becomes your collaborator, or at least your evaluator within a structure you set. Picture this. It's late afternoon and the light in the room has that clean, unforgiving look, sun filtered through glass, making everyone's skin look slightly desaturated. The table is wide enough that voices have to travel. There's water in identical bottles. Not offered, placed. You're presenting a decision you made. It's not reckless. It's not sloppy. It's a call you made under time pressure, with incomplete data, because the timeline demanded it. Across from you is a senior person who doesn't interrupt often. They wait. They let you speak until you think you're safe. They sit back, one ankle over the other, hands resting in a way that looks relaxed but isn't. Their gaze doesn't bounce. It stays steady, like they're pinning something down. You finish your sentence. There's that pause. Not empty. Charged. Then they say, "Why are we doing it that way?" The tone is even. But you can hear it, the question isn't hungry for detail. It's hungry for hierarchy. Your body reacts first. You feel that small compression in your chest, like your lungs get slightly smaller. Your brain offers you the old strategy immediately: explain, prove, burn. And you start. Because the other option would have taken longer, and we didn't want to risk delays, and also based on what we saw last time. You hear yourself stacking reasons. One on top of another. You think you're building a solid wall. But watch what happens. The senior person's eyes flick, just once, to the side, toward someone else at the table, like they're checking something. Not agreement. Confirmation. A quiet message passes without words, they're explaining. Someone else looks down at their laptop. Not to work. To disengage slightly, as if this is now your monologue, not a shared decision space. You keep talking. You add more, because we didn't have enough input from Team B, and because the dependency risk. Now the senior person tilts their head a fraction, like they're listening to a story they didn't ask for. Their face stays neutral, but their attention has a different texture now. It's not receiving. It's measuring. They interrupt softly, so are you saying you didn't validate with them? Your stomach drops again. Because that's not what you meant. But the more you explain, the more you create openings for people to reframe you. You try to correct it. No, we did validate, but because the timeline, what I mean is. You can feel how that phrase changes your posture from upright to slightly angled. Like you're leaning into their approval. And the room feels it too. Now, same room, same question, different move. They ask, why are we doing it that way? You feel the reflex. But you don't follow it. You let one breath happen. Not for drama. For control. You keep your shoulders where they are. You keep your gaze steady, not confrontational, stable. And you answer with a standard, not a defense. We're doing it this way because it minimizes dependency risk under our deadline. Then you stop. No additional context. No extra history. No, and also. No scramble. Just one sentence that contains the decision, the priority, the constraint. And now watch the room. The senior person doesn't lean back. They lean slightly forward, almost imperceptibly, like their attention has found something firm to land on. One of the others at the table lifts their eyes from their laptop again, because now it feels like a real decision conversation, not a justification performance. The senior person says, what dependency risk? Now you can explain, without explaining yourself. Team B approvals. If they stall, we miss the window. This path keeps execution inside our control. Short. Clean. Owned. No apology hiding in it. No fear. The meeting continues. And the energy stays upright. Because you didn't try to buy legitimacy with because. You used because to describe a standard, not to plead for acceptance. That distinction is everything. So here's the tactical breakdown, step by step. Step 1, identify what kind of why you're hearing. There are two kinds of why questions in high-status rooms. Information why, they genuinely need your reasoning to make a better call. Frame why, they're testing whether you hold your ground or collapse into defense. You can usually tell by the vibe. Information why feels curious. Frame why feels still. Information why invites dialogue. Frame why watches to see if you rush. Step 2, answer with a standard first sentence. Before you give detail, give a sentence that contains outcome. What you're optimizing. Constraint, what you're protecting. Principle, what you won't trade. Examples. We chose this because it hits the metric we own without adding external approvals. We're doing it this way because it reduces risk under the timeline you set. This is the decision because it keeps execution controllable. If that constraint changes, we revisit. Notice what those do. They don't sound defensive. They sound like governance. Step 3, stop after one sentence. This is the hard part. Most people can say the sentence, but they can't stop. They keep talking because silence feels like rejection. But silence is where your status signal lives. Stopping tells the room, I'm not panicking. I'm not negotiating my right to decide. If you want more, ask. Step 4, only then offer detail, in layers. If they ask for more, you give it. But you give it like a person who expects to be understood, not like a person who fears being misunderstood. 1 layer. Stop. Second layer if requested. Stop. You're pacing, not performing. Common mistake versus power correction. Mistake, you answer, why, by dumping context to protect yourself from judgment. Correction, you answer, why, by naming the standard that governs the decision, then you let them pull details out if needed. Now here's the dark nuance. If you do this correctly, some people will feel it as a loss of control. Because a certain kind of person doesn't ask, why, to understand you. They ask, why, to place themselves above you. They want you explaining because it keeps you in the lower position. So when you stop playing that game, they may escalate. They may repeat the question with a sharper edge. They may say, no, I'm asking why you chose that, in a tone that tries to push you back into defendant posture. This is where it gets dangerous if you misunderstand the rule. You don't respond with arrogance. You respond with calm structure. You repeat the standard, and you offer the conditional. We chose it to minimize dependency. Risk under the deadline. If you want to optimize for a different priority, tell me which one, and we can adjust. That sentence does something subtle. It doesn't fight them. It forces them to name the real criteria. It turns a power test into a decision conversation. That's the ethical boundary too. You're not using this to manipulate the room. You're using it to keep the conversation honest. You're refusing to perform fear. And knowing this rule still isn't enough. Because the next layer is what happens when they don't challenge your decision directly, they challenge your competence with a question disguised as curiosity. The kind of question that sounds reasonable but lands like a pin. 3. The silence that feels like a trap. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right after you finish speaking in a high-status room. Not the normal silence where people are thinking. Not the comfortable silence of a team that trusts each other. This one is different. It has weight. It's the silence where the air changes. Where shoulders settle into place like armor. Where someone's jaw tightens just enough to tell you they're not processing your words, they're processing you. You can feel it in your body before you can name it. A slight heat behind the ears. A pulse you suddenly notice in your throat. That tiny urge to fix whatever just happened by adding one more sentence. One more clarification. One more reason. And the impulse is almost always the same. Fill it. Because silence feels like judgment when you're the one being watched. That's how most people lose their frame. Not because they said the wrong thing. Because they couldn't tolerate the moment after they said it. You were taught that good communicators make things clear. That awkward gaps mean confusion. That if people aren't responding, you should help them by expanding, clarifying, softening, adding context. That belief makes sense. It makes sense because in most rooms, silence can mean disengagement. It can mean misunderstanding. It can mean people didn't hear you. It can mean you need to keep the energy moving. But in high-status rooms, silence often means something else entirely. It means the room is checking whether you're stable without feedback. High-status rooms don't just listen to content. They listen to your nervous system. They are constantly asking, quietly, subconsciously. Does this person need approval to stay upright? Do they collapse without validation? Do they start bargaining when pressure increases? And silence is the cleanest test they have. Because silence gives you nowhere to hide. When the room goes still, your body has to decide what you believe about your own authority. If your nervous system panics, you start talking. If your nervous system stays grounded, you hold the space. And that difference, tiny as it seems, changes how people relate to you. Here's the hidden rule nobody says out loud. In high-status rooms, silence is not empty. It's currency. The person who can hold it without flinching is usually perceived as the person with leverage, even if they don't. Most people hear that and think it means you should become cold, stoic, performatively unbothered. No. This isn't about acting like a statue. It's about not bleeding status through anxious movement. Because when you can't tolerate silence, you signal something the room understands instantly. You're not speaking from a settled position. You're speaking to get a response. And when you speak to get a response, you place the room above you. That's why the silence feels like a trap. Because if you fill it, you fall. And if you hold it, you rise. Picture this. It's a boardroom or something close to it, maybe not a literal board, but the energy is the same. Clean lines, neutral colors, furniture that looks expensive because it doesn't try to impress you. The chairs are heavy. The table is wide enough to create distance. There's a window, but you barely notice it. The daylight is flat, bright without warmth. You can see your reflection faintly in the glass behind the other side of the table, which makes you feel like you're being watched twice. You're mid-meeting. You've delivered an update. You've made a decision. You've said the standard first sentence like you're supposed to. You did the right thing. We chose this path to minimize dependency risk under the deadline. You stopped. You let the words land. And then it happens. Silence. Not a long one. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But in that room it feels like 10. The senior person doesn't react. No nod, no smile, no okay. Their face stays neutral in that calm way that makes you question yourself. One of the other people at the table looks down at their notes. Another looks at you without expression, like they're waiting for you to do something. And your body interprets it the way it always has. They didn't like it. They think I'm wrong. I sounded too confident. I sounded too blunt. I should clarify. You can feel the urge rising in your throat like pressure behind a valve. So you start to rescue yourself. And just to add, what I mean by dependency risk is, you hear your own voice. It comes out a little faster than your first sentence. A little higher. A little more eager. You keep going because you're trying to manufacture safety. You're trying to turn silence into approval. But watch what happens. The senior person's gaze doesn't sharpen. It doesn't soften. It just stays. Which is worse, because now you're speaking into a room that isn't giving you anything back. You talk a bit more, then you add a laugh that isn't really a laugh, more like a small release of nervous air. And yeah, the timeline was tight, so now someone's pen stops moving. Not because they're listening more. Because the room has quietly decided, he's explaining himself. And once you're explaining yourself, you're not leading the conversation anymore. You're reacting to it. The silence after your first sentence was a doorway. If you had held it, the room would have had to step toward you, ask a question, engage, choose a direction. By filling it, you stepped toward them. You made yourself accessible in the wrong way. You offered your authority up like a document to be reviewed. That's the trap. Because the silence is not asking you for more words. It's asking you for steadiness. Now rewind. Same room. Same moment. Same silence. You deliver your line. We chose this path to minimize dependency risk under the deadline. You stop. Silence. You feel the urge to fill it. But you don't move. You don't harden. You don't glare. You don't perform. You simply stay. You let your hands rest. You keep your shoulders where they are. You keep your breath slow enough that your body doesn't begin to bargain. 2 seconds. 3. And then something shifts. Not inside you. Inside the room. The senior person speaks. What dependency risk? Now the room is pulling information from you rather than you pouring it out. And that changes everything. Because when they pull, you are the source. When you pour, you are the applicant. You answer cleanly. Team B approvals. If they stall, we miss the window. This path keeps execution inside our control. Then you stop again. This is the part that feels unnatural at first. Stopping twice. But it creates a pattern the room can't ignore. You speak in decisions, not in apologies. The meeting continues. The room stays upright. Your status stays intact, not because you dominated, but because you didn't leak. Here's the psychology reveal. People think status is about confidence, charisma, or being the alpha. It's not. Most of status, especially in professional rooms, is a nervous system signal. A room full of high-status people has spent years watching who holds pressure and who folds. They watch who flinches when challenged. They watch who rambles when uncertain. They watch who tries to make everyone comfortable at the cost of their own position. And they watch who can let silence exist without trying to seduce it into friendliness. When you can't tolerate silence, you send 3 signals at once. You need feedback to stay stable. You are negotiating your own authority. You're trying to manage perception instead of managing outcomes. Those are expensive signals. Not because anyone hates you. Because high-status rooms are allergic to unstable leaders. They can smell instability the same way your body can smell smoke, subtle, immediate, and hard to ignore. Now the tactical breakdown. The move: speak, stop, hold. Step 1, deliver the standard first sentence. 1 sentence. Outcome plus constraint plus principle. Step 2, stop before your nervous system begs you to. This is the moment you'll feel the pressure spike. That's normal. Step 3, hold the silence like it's part of your answer. Because it is. Think of silence as the punctuation that tells the room your sentence was complete. Most people end their sentence and immediately add an asterisk. Here's the decision, unless you don't like it. That asterisk is what kills you. Holding silence removes the asterisk. It says, that was the thought. It stands. If you need something, ask. Step 4, answer only what is asked next. Not what you fear they might ask. Not what you wish they'd ask. What they actually ask. Step 5, stop again. Make the room do the work of continuing the thread. This does 2 things. It makes you look high status, yes. But more importantly, it forces the conversation to stay honest. Instead of you preemptively defending against invisible objections, the room has to name its actual concern. That is how decisions get made cleanly. The common mistake, over-clarifying to buy safety. People don't over-explain because they love the sound of their voice. They do it because silence feels like danger. So they try to buy safety with more words. But in high-status rooms, safety isn't purchased with words. It's communicated with steadiness. The power correction, let the room reveal itself. Here's a line that helps. If there's a concern, I'm happy to address it. Not as a plea. As a structure. It invites specificity without putting you on trial. Or even cleaner. What concern are you pointing to? Again, calm. You're not challenging them. You're asking them to stop hiding behind vague pressure. Now, here's the dark nuance. Silence can be weaponized. Some people use it to intimidate. To make others squirm. To establish dominance. That's not the point here. The ethical boundary is simple. You're not holding silence to punish people. You're holding silence to refuse anxious submission. There's a difference. If someone is genuinely confused, you clarify. If a junior person asks a sincere question, you don't stare them down like a statue. You respond warmly and cleanly. But when a high-status room goes silent as a test, your job is not to entertain the test. Your job is to remain stable through it. Because if you can hold the silence without performing, you become the kind of person whose words land. And when your words land, you don't need to chase them after you say them. And knowing that still isn't enough. Because sometimes the room doesn't test you with silence. Sometimes it tests you with a question that sounds innocent, reasonable even, but carries an insult inside it. A question that quietly says, "Are you sure you belong here?" Ready for next section. 4. Two people, same facts, different gravity. You've seen two versions of the same moment. Same room. Same stakes. Same slide deck. Same numbers. One person speaks and the room leans in like gravity just increased. Another person speaks and the room leans back like they're waiting for the real answer to arrive. And the brutal part is this, it's not always the smarter person who gets the lean in. It's not always the one with better data. Sometimes it's the one who says less. You've watched it happen and felt that quiet irritation in your chest because it makes no sense if you believe the world rewards clarity. You're sitting there thinking, I could explain this better than them. I could defend this better. I could answer every question cleanly. But the room isn't rewarding defense. The room is rewarding gravity. And gravity doesn't come from how much you know. It comes from what you signal about your position while you speak. Here's the contrast you've lived. Version A, the person who explains everything, anticipates every objection, tries to be airtight. Version B, the person who states the decision like it already belongs in the room, then pauses like the room can catch up. Same content. Different frame. And in a high-status room, frame is the invisible scoreboard. Most people don't notice this because they're listening to the words, not the posture behind the words. They're tracking information, not hierarchy cues. They think communication is about transmitting facts. But high-status rooms are not just information environments. They're status environments. Which means every sentence gets measured not only for what it says, but for what it reveals about the speaker's nervous system. That's why two people can present the same facts and get opposite reactions. Because one is presenting to be accepted. The other is presenting as if acceptance is assumed. And the room is trained to follow the second one. You were taught that explaining well makes you credible. And it does, sometimes. But in high-status rooms, credibility is often assigned before your second sentence. Not because the room is unfair. Because the room is fast. It's trying to answer a simpler question than, are they correct? It's asking, are they stable enough to be followed? And stability is communicated through compression. Compression is not vagueness. Compression is the ability to hold complexity internally without leaking it onto the table as anxiety. That's why the less is more cliché exists, but nobody tells you what it really means. Less is more is not about being mysterious. It's about not treating the room like you're on trial. Here's what was actually happening in those moments you've watched. When the first person speaks, they start with context. They start with hedges. They start with, just to clarify, and, to be transparent, and, the reason is. They hand the room a set of ropes and say, without realizing it, if you pull, I'll keep proving. So the room pulls. And the more they pull, the more that person becomes a supplier of explanations instead of an owner of decisions. When the second person speaks, they start with a standard. Outcome. Constraint. Next step. They don't over-defend. They don't over-apologize. They don't try to preempt every possible misunderstanding. They assume the room can ask. So the room asks. And that person stays the source. That's the difference. Not volume. Position. Now let's make it concrete. Picture a high-status meeting where everyone's dressed like they're allergic to showing effort. They have that polished neutrality, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only human with a pulse. There's a screen at the front. The slides are clean. No clutter. Everything looks like it went through 3 rounds of review. 2 people are presenting back-to-back updates on related work streams. Same structure. Same audience. Same senior decision-maker at the end of the table who barely reacts unless something matters. First presenter goes up. They're competent. You can tell. Their notes are sharp. Their analysis is deep. They begin. Okay, so just to set the context, we had 3 options, and we initially explored option A, but due to constraints, we pivoted, and I want to explain the reasoning. You can feel it in your body as you listen, they're already defending. Not because they're wrong, because they're trying to earn permission before stating the decision. The senior person watches silently. Their face doesn't change. The presenter continues, stacking context like they're building a wall. And the reason we didn't go with the other approach is because the timeline was tight. And because we didn't want to introduce dependency risk, and because based on last quarter. Their voice is smooth, but there's a faint urgency inside it. They keep going, trying to cover every edge. And then the questions start. Not collaborative questions. Probe questions. So why wasn't Team B consulted earlier? Who signed off on this? What data are you using to assume that risk? The presenter answers. They explain more. They give more details. They try to be thorough. But the room doesn't soften. It becomes more vertical. The senior person asks one clean question that lands like a stamp. Why are you telling me this now? It's not loud. It's not angry. It's just a power question. And you watch the presenter's posture change. You can literally see it, shoulders narrow, chin dips slightly, voice goes into explanation mode. They say, because we wanted to make sure the analysis was complete. Translation, in a status room, I'm asking you to approve my diligence. Now the second presenter goes up. Different personality. Similar competence. They start with one sentence. We're moving forward with option A because it hits the metric we own without adding external approvals. Then they stop. The room goes silent for 2 seconds. You can feel the temptation to fill it, even as an observer. But they don't. They let the silence exist. The senior person leans forward slightly. What approvals? The presenter answers cleanly. Team B. If they stall, we miss the window. This path keeps execution controllable. Then they stop again. And something subtle happens. The questions that follow are different. They're not probes to weaken the person. They're clarifications to refine the decision. What's the contingency if team B comes back with objections? How do we measure whether option A is working within 2 weeks? Who owns the communication to stakeholders? Same room. Same senior person. Different energy. Because the second presenter did not enter the room begging to be evaluated. They entered as if the work was already real, and the room's job was to align, not to judge. That is gravity. And you can learn it without becoming cold. Here's the real reveal: gravity is often just clean decision architecture. High-status rooms love clean architecture because it reduces their cognitive load. They don't want your emotional process. They want the decision, the reason in one line, the risks, and the triggers that change the decision. When you hand them that structure, you feel like an operator. When you hand them your internal debate, you feel like an applicant. This is where people get trapped. They think, if I compress, I'm hiding. If I compress, I'm being vague. If I compress, they'll think I'm glossing over details. So they expand. And expansion under pressure reads like insecurity. Not always. But often enough that it becomes a pattern. So here's the move. The move: deliver your decision in owner format. Owner format is simple. 3 lines. Decision. Standard. Outcome plus constraint. Condition. What changes it? That's it. Example. Decision: we're moving forward with option A. Standard: it gets us the outcome under the deadline without external dependencies. Condition: if Team B can commit to a 48-hour turnaround, we revisit option B. Notice what this does. It answers 80% of the room's concerns without you pleading. It shows you're not guessing, you're governing. And the condition line is a quiet flex, because it shows you're not attached to being right. You're attached to a framework. That's what high-status rooms trust. Not certainty. Framework. Now the cinematic version of this, where the mistake and the power move become obvious. Picture this: you're in a glass-walled conference room at night. The city lights outside look like scattered circuitry. The room smells faintly like marker ink and expensive coffee. Someone left a jacket on a chair, nobody sits down until the senior leader does. You're presenting a controversial decision. Not unethical. Not reckless. Just a decision that will upset someone. Which means the room is primed to test you. The senior leader looks at you with that calm expression that feels like a mirror. They ask, "Walk me through your thinking." Not, "What did you decide?" Not, "What's the plan?" Walk me through your thinking. This is where people fall into the trap. Because, "walk me through," sounds collaborative, but in a high-status room it's often a request to see whether your mind is stable. Your body reacts. You can feel your stomach tighten because you hear the subtext: prove you deserve to have decided. Your instinct says, explain everything from the beginning. Show diligence. Show effort. Show you thought of everything. Your internal monologue lights up. If I start with the decision, they'll think I'm skipping steps. If I don't show the analysis, they'll assume I didn't do it. If I say it too cleanly, they'll challenge me harder. So most people do the weak response. They start narrating their internal process. Okay, so first we looked at the data from last quarter, and then we considered a few alternatives, and the team debated the trade-offs, and I want to acknowledge there's risk here, but... You're talking, but you're also bracing. And you can feel it, the room is not coming with you. They're watching you. You say, and because the timeline is tight, we felt like this was the safest. And right there, you see it. A micro-expression from the senior leader, a tiny lift of one eyebrow, then nothing. A signal that says, you're negotiating. The frame tilts. Someone else at the table shifts in their chair. Not bored. Adjusting. Like they're preparing to ask harder questions. You keep going. You add context. You add caveats. You add assurances. And then the senior leader interrupts with a tone that's still calm, but now sharper. Stop. What did you decide? That's the moment where your stomach drops because you realize the story didn't help you. It made you look less in control. Now the power move. Same question, walk me through your thinking. You don't refuse it. You just don't comply the way they expect. You take one breath. You keep your face neutral. You speak like an owner. We decided to move forward with option A. Silence. Then you add the standard. Because it hits the metric we own without creating a dependency we can't control. Silence again. Now watch the room. The senior leader's eyes narrow slightly, not in anger, in focus. The room is suddenly listening like the conversation became real. They ask, what dependency? You answer with one clean line. Team B approvals. If they stall, we miss the window. Then you add the condition. If they can commit to a 48-hour turnaround, we revisit option B, otherwise, we proceed. You stop. And something changes. Not because you were louder. Because you were structured. The meeting continues. But the questions now come from a different place. They are about refining, not undermining. That's what owner format does. It forces the room to either accept the framework or argue with it explicitly, which is harder. Because to argue with it, they have to name their real priorities. And high-status rooms respect people who force priorities into the open. Tactical breakdown, how to build gravity in real time. Step 1, start with the decision. Even if they ask for thinking first, you lead with the decision. It anchors the conversation. Step 2, give one standard sentence. Outcome plus constraint. One line. No essay. Step 3, offer a condition. What would change your decision? This signals non-defensiveness and strategic flexibility. Step 4, stop. You do not keep talking to preempt their judgment. Step 5, let them pull. If they need details, they ask. And when they ask, you answer exactly what was asked, no more. Common mistake versus power correction. Mistake, you try to prove you deserve your decision by narrating your diligence. Correction, you demonstrate you deserve your decision by presenting a clean framework and letting the room engage with it. Now here's the nuance that makes this dangerous if you use it wrong. Gravity can become a mask. Some people learn compression and use it to hide weak thinking. They speak in clean sentences so nobody notices they didn't do the work. They weaponize brevity to avoid accountability. That is where this becomes a scam. The ethical boundary is this. Compression is not an excuse to be opaque. Compression is a way to respect the room's time and protect your frame. If someone asks for details, you provide them. If there's a risk, you name it. If you made a trade-off, you own it. Gravity is not withholding. Gravity is owning. And once you understand this, you start noticing something that changes everything. High-status rooms don't automatically respect confidence. They respect consistency. The person who speaks in owner format consistently becomes predictable in the best way: decisions, standards, conditions. No pleading. No scrambling. No performance. Which means the room stops trying to figure out your emotional position and starts focusing on outcomes. And knowing that still isn't enough. Because the next layer is the most personal one, the voice in your head that panics and says, "If I don't explain myself, they'll misread me." That voice sounds protective. But it's the same voice that keeps you auditioning. Ready for next section. 5. The voice that panics: "If I don't explain, they'll misread me." The voice doesn't show up as a sentence at first. It shows up as a sensation. A tightening behind the sternum. A little heat at the back of the neck. That faint, urgent hum in your body that says, "Careful." Then the thought arrives, clean and immediate, like it's protecting you. If I don't explain, they'll misread me. If I don't clarify, they'll assume the worst. If I don't show my reasoning, they'll think I'm sloppy. And the most dangerous part? That voice sounds responsible. It sounds like professionalism. It sounds like maturity. It sounds like, "I'm not defensive, I'm just making sure we're aligned." But if you watch what it actually does to you in a high-status room, it's not aligning you. It's bending you. Because, "They'll misread me," is not a logic problem. It's a status fear. It's the fear that your value depends on being interpreted correctly in real time. And when you believe that, you start talking like a person trying to control perception, not like a person owning outcomes. That's why this rule is so hard to live by. Not because you don't understand the mechanics. Because your nervous system thinks explanation is how you stay safe. You don't over-explain because you're dumb. You over-explain because you're trying to survive a social hierarchy without losing your dignity. And if you've ever been misread in a room like that, if you've ever felt your words get summarized into something uglier than what you meant, you learned a reflex. Don't leave space. Because space gets filled by someone else's interpretation. So you fill it first. You fill it with context. With disclaimers. With careful tone. With, "Just to be clear." You fill it like sandbags. And it never feels like weakness while you're doing it. It feels like control. But it's not control. It's surrender wearing a suit. Here's what's actually happening in that split second when the internal monologue kicks in. You're not responding to the question. You're responding to the imagined version of the question. Not, "Why did you do that?" But, "Do you deserve to have done that? Are you competent enough to be trusted? Are you about to be exposed?" That's why your body reacts before your mouth does. Because the room isn't just a room. It's a ranking environment. And in a ranking environment, people don't just fear being wrong. They fear being lowered. That's the hidden psychology. the explanation impulse is often a fear response to status threat. You're trying to prevent a downgrade. So you start saying things that sound reasonable, but land like uncertainty. You soften your claims. You overqualify. You narrate your thought process as if transparency will protect you. But the room doesn't read it as transparency. It reads it as negotiation. And the second you start negotiating your own authority, the room learns it can keep pushing. Now picture it. You're in a meeting that isn't openly hostile, which almost makes it worse. The people in it are polite. They smile at the right moments. They use calm voices. They say, "Great question," while their eyes stay flat. You're presenting a plan. You've prepared. You've done the work. You're not guessing. But the room has one person who doesn't like being surprised. They ask questions that sound neutral but carry a weight inside them. They say, "Help me understand why you thought that was the right call. Help me understand." It's a soft phrase. A reasonable phrase. But you feel it in your body like a probe. Your chest tightens slightly, and your brain runs the calculation in the background. If I answer too short, they'll think I'm hiding something. If I answer too firm, they'll think I'm arrogant. If I answer too detailed, they'll think I'm defensive. So you do what most people do. You try to cover every angle. You say, "Yeah, so the reason we went with that is because, well, there were a few factors, and we looked at the data, and we also considered the alternative, and we wanted to make sure we weren't." And as you're talking, you feel that familiar sensation, you're working. Not working on the plan, working on their perception of you. You can feel yourself performing stability instead of embodying it. And then it happens, the room misreads you anyway. The senior person interrupts, calmly, "So you didn't validate the assumption with the team?" And your stomach drops because you did validate it. You did the thing. But now you're being summarized into a mistake you didn't make. This is the moment that creates a lifetime habit. Because it feels unfair. It feels like reality is being rewritten in front of you. So you rush to correct it. "No, we did validate it. What I mean is, because the timeline, what happened was." You can hear it, your sentences start stacking, and the center of them shifts from decision-making to self-defense. Your voice changes too. Slightly higher. Slightly faster. More eager to be understood. And that's when you lose something you can't get back with more words. You lose frame. Because now the room has you where it wants you, clarifying, correcting, proving, reassuring. You're not leading anymore. You're responding. And the worst part? You can feel it while it's happening. That sinking awareness, "I'm explaining myself again." Now the power move is not to become cold. The power move is to stop treating misread as an emergency. Because being misread is not always a threat. Sometimes it's a test. Sometimes it's just sloppy listening. Sometimes it's a power play. And the moment you treat it like an emergency, you signal you can be controlled by interpretation. So here's the alternative. Same moment. Same question. "Help me understand why you thought that was the right call." You feel the reflex. But you don't sprint into the explanation. You answer with a standard first, calmly, and you hold it. "We made the call because it protects the deadline while keeping execution controllable." Stop. That's the key. You don't chase the room's understanding. You offer a clear standard and let them engage. They respond, "So you didn't validate the assumption with the team?" Now here's the moment that separates people. Most people treat that as an accusation that must be neutralized immediately. But you treat it as a clarification request wrapped in a flawed premise. You do not argue emotionally with the premise. You correct it cleanly. We did validate it. The open question wasn't validity, it was timing. Stop. 2 sentences. 1 correction. 1 standard. No apology. No lengthy story. No frantic, let me explain. Now watch the room. The senior person's posture shifts. Not dramatically. Just a small recalibration, like the conversation snapped back into alignment. Because you didn't act like misinterpretation was a threat to your identity. You treated it like a detail to correct. And that keeps you upright. Picture it as a mini-movie. You're in a mid-sized conference room. The light is bright enough to feel clinical. There's a faint smell of dry erase marker. Someone's laptop fan is audible in the quiet moments, like the room has its own nervous system. The senior person sits slightly angled, one arm resting on the table, fingers lightly tapping twice, then stopping. They look at you the way someone looks at a lock they're deciding whether to test. They say, "Help me understand why you thought that was the right call." Trigger. Your body reacts, small stomach drop, throat tightness, that quick flash of heat under the collar. Your instinct says, explain everything. Control the narrative. Internal conflict hits fast. If I don't show my work, they'll assume I'm winging it. If they think I'm winging it, I'm done. If I speak too short, I look arrogant. If I speak too long, I look weak. 3 seconds. A full debate in your skull. The mistake is what most people do next. You start with context. You say, "So basically," and you're already sliding downhill. You add, "because, twice." You add a caveat. You soften your claims. You try to preempt every possible misunderstanding. And you can see it, the senior person leans back a fraction. Their eyes stop looking curious and start looking managerial. The frame tilts. They interrupt with a summary that's wrong. So you didn't validate it. Now you're scrambling to correct. The power move is different. You answer like an owner. We made the call because it protects the deadline while keeping execution controllable. You stop. Silence. 2 seconds. Your nervous system screams to fill it. You let it scream and you don't obey. The senior person says, "So you didn't validate it." You correct, cleanly. We validated it. The trade-off wasn't validity, it was speed. Stop. Now the room has to engage with your framework, not your panic. Aftermath, the conversation moves forward. The senior person doesn't win by making you dance. They have to ask real questions. What did validation show? You answer. Results were stable across 2 samples. If that changes, we adjust. Short. Conditional. Owned. And you'll notice something that feels almost strange, your body stays calmer. Not because the room got nicer. Because you stopped making your self-worth dependent on perfect interpretation. That's the deeper rule inside rule number 1. Never explain yourself in a high-status room doesn't mean never provide clarity. It means, don't treat clarity as a bribe. Don't pour your legitimacy onto the table hoping the room will hand it back. Instead, hold your standard. Correct misreads cleanly. Offer details and layers when requested. And stop giving your nervous system the steering wheel. So here's the tactical breakdown you can use immediately. Step 1, separate misread from threat. When someone misinterprets you, your body will want to treat it like danger. Train yourself to treat it like a data point. A misread is not a verdict. It's a moment to clarify. Step 2, correct in one sentence. Not 3. Not a paragraph. 1. We did validate it. We already aligned with Team B. That assumption was tested. Then stop. Step 3, restate the standard. Immediately after correction, restate the framework. The trade-off was speed versus dependency. We optimized for controllability under the deadline. Now the room has a structure to engage with. Step 4, refuse to narrate your innocence. This is the trap. When you narrate your innocence, you accept the frame that you're guilty until proven otherwise. You don't need to prove you're a good person. You need to demonstrate a good framework. Step 5, offer conditional flexibility, not pleading. If that constraint changes, we can revisit. That line signals maturity without begging. Now here's the uncomfortable nuance. Sometimes you're afraid of being misread because you've been punished for it before. Maybe someone above you used misinterpretation as leverage. Maybe they would twist your words, then watch you scramble. Maybe the room you grew up in, professionally or personally, made it dangerous to be misunderstood. If that's your history, the explanation reflex isn't just a habit. It's armor. So this isn't about shaming you out of it. It's about teaching your body a new form of safety, steadiness. Because when you can tolerate being briefly misunderstood without panicking, you gain something rare. You gain the ability to stay high status without becoming hostile. And knowing this still isn't enough. Because the next layer is where your helpfulness becomes a silent emotion, where you start carrying the emotional and conversational labor of the room, and they start expecting you to. That's when explaining isn't just a reflex. It becomes your role. Ready for next section. 6. The helpful habit that quietly demotes you. You've been the one who saves the room. Maybe it's small things. You notice the confusion before anyone admits it, so you clarify. You sense tension rising, so you smooth it. You see two people talking past each other, so you translate. Maybe you've been in a meeting where someone high status says something vague, and everyone pretends they understand. So you step in, politely, and you make it make sense. Or you've been in the room where a senior person challenges a decision with that calm, cutting why, and instead of holding frame, you start offering context to protect the team, protect the work, protect the timeline. You don't do it because you're weak. You do it because you're useful. And usefulness is seductive because it feels like value. But here's the part nobody warns you about. In a high-status room, the person who constantly helps by explaining becomes the person the room subconsciously assigns to support. You become the translator, the smoother, the explainer, the emotional shock absorber. And once the room assigns you that role, it's hard to climb out of it without feeling like you're changing personalities. Because the room doesn't say, "We see you as support." It just starts behaving that way. They look to you when things get messy. They wait for you to fill gaps. They expect you to take the friction off their hands. And the more you do it, the more your authority leaks out through generosity. This is why never explain yourself in a high-status room has a hidden second meaning. It's not just about your explanations under pressure. It's about the way you accidentally become the room's explanation engine. And once you're the engine, you're not the driver. You're the mechanism. Most people don't notice it happening because it's gradual. It happens in tiny moments. You offer one extra line of context so the senior person doesn't get annoyed. You soften someone else's blunt statement so it doesn't create conflict. You answer questions that weren't asked because you can feel the discomfort building. Each time, you feel like you're being professional. Each time, the room feels slightly more comfortable. But the room also learns something about you. You will carry the weight. And when you carry the weight, you stop being treated like the person who sets direction. You get treated like the person who keeps things from falling apart. That's not a compliment. It's a demotion disguised as reliability. Here's the psychology reveal. High-status rooms have a constant need, certainty without friction. They want decisions made. They want alignment. They want outcomes. But they don't want emotional mess. They don't want to negotiate feelings. They don't want to spend time untangling confusion if someone else will do it faster. So when you step in to help by over-explaining, you make the room efficient. And efficiency gets rewarded. In the short term, people nod. They say, "That's helpful." They say, "Thanks for clarifying." They say, "Appreciate the context." Your brain hears, "I'm valuable." But the room hears, "This person will do the labor." And labor, in status environments, often gets ranked below leadership, even if the labor is intellectual. This is why you can be indispensable and still not be respected. Because you're indispensable the way a great assistant is indispensable. Not the way a decision maker is indispensable. The difference is brutal and subtle. Decision makers create direction and tolerate discomfort. Support roles reduce discomfort and create smoothness. When you explain yourself too much, you're reducing discomfort to earn acceptance. When you explain the room too much, you're reducing discomfort to keep the system running. Either way, you're training the room to expect you to translate reality into something digestible. That's the habit that quietly demotes you. Now picture the scene where this plays out. You're in a high-status meeting. There's a senior leader who likes sharpness, the kind that makes people speak carefully. There are two other stakeholders who are invested in looking competent. Everyone's dressed in neutral colors. Nobody laughs loudly. The air feels filtered. You're presenting. Another team's also presenting. The conversation is starting to fray because priorities aren't aligned, and the senior leader can sense it. You can sense it too. That moment when someone says something slightly evasive, and you feel your stomach tighten because you know what's coming next, the senior person will ask a question that makes the room go tense. You already feel the urge. Let me soften this. Let me clarify. Let me make it safe. And that's where the trap lives. Because your helpfulness becomes a way of volunteering to be lower status. Picture this. You're in a glass conference room with a whiteboard wall that's been wiped so many times it looks permanently smeared. The lighting is bright enough to show every micro-expression. Outside the glass, people move past like shadows, but inside, everything is still. The senior leader sits at the head of the table, angled slightly toward the person presenting from the other team. Their face is calm in that way that makes you feel like your words are being weighed. The other presenter just finished saying something vague. We're basically aligned, and we'll move forward once we get the final inputs. It sounds reasonable. It also says nothing. The senior leader pauses. The room goes quiet. You can hear the faint rattle of an air vent. Then the senior leader asks, "Final inputs from who?" The other presenter hesitates, half a second too long. Their eyes flick down. Their shoulders pull in slightly, like they're about to explain a mess. You feel it in your own body, that little urge to rescue. Because you know the answer. You know the dependency is Team B. You know the timeline. You know the risk. And you can sense what's about to happen. If the other presenter stumbles, the senior leader will press harder. The tension will spike. The meeting will become uncomfortable. People will start posturing. So you step in. You say, quickly, it's Team B approvals, and we've already spoken with them. There's a risk they take longer, but the reason we're confident is because last quarter. You can hear yourself adding, because, without meaning to. You're trying to help. And the senior leader looks at you. Not angry. Not grateful. Just, registering. The other presenter relaxes a little, because you just carried the heat. And that's when it happens, the room subtly reassigns roles. From this moment forward, you're not just a participant. You're the translator. The senior leader says, okay. So what's the timeline risk? And before the other presenter can answer, you answer again. Worst case, we slip by 2 weeks, but we can mitigate by parallelizing, and the reason we didn't do that earlier is. You're doing it again. Narrating, smoothing, preempting. You're saving the room from discomfort. But you're also doing something else. You are explaining for someone. And that is one of the fastest ways to lower your perceived status in a high-status room. Because now you are not the person with the decision. You're the person who explains the decision. The senior leader nods, but not in respect. In closure. Got it. Meeting moves on. Afterward, the other presenter says, thanks for jumping in. They mean it. But what they don't realize is they just took a piece of your authority without asking. And you offered it. Because you thought the job was to keep things smooth. Now let's replay the same scene, same room, same question, but with the power move. The other presenter says the vague line. We're basically aligned, and we'll move forward once we get the final inputs. The senior leader asks, final inputs from who? The presenter hesitates. You feel the urge to rescue. Your body wants to step in, because you can already taste the discomfort that's about to rise. But you don't. Not because you're cold. Because you understand the rule, never explain yourself in a high-status room also means never volunteer to become the room's explainer. You let the discomfort exist. 2 seconds. The other presenter answers, Team B. The senior leader's eyes narrow slightly. And what's their turnaround? The presenter stumbles again. You still don't jump in. Because jumping in would make you the buffer between the senior leader and reality. And the buffer is not the leader. The buffer is the assistant. So instead, you wait until you are asked. The senior leader turns to you directly and says, what have you heard from Team B? Now you speak, cleanly, in owner format, without saving anyone. Team B said best case is 48 hours, worst case is a week. Our plan assumes a week. If we get 48 hours, we accelerate. Then you stop. No extra history. No justification. No, because we've been burned before. No performance. Just an owned framework. And now watch the room. The senior leader nods, not closure, but recognition. Because you gave them something usable. The other presenter sits up straighter, because now they have to own their part. And you didn't rescue them from pressure. You let the room put pressure where it belongs. That's the difference between helpfulness and leadership. Leadership tolerates discomfort long enough for truth to emerge. Helpfulness often smothers discomfort so nobody has to look bad. And high-status rooms, at the top, respect truth more than comfort. Even when they pretend they don't. So here's the tactical breakdown. The move: stop volunteering as the translator. Step 1, notice the rescue impulse. The moment you feel it, tight chest, urge to jump in, label it internally. Rescue impulse. That naming alone slows it down. Step 2, ask yourself one question. Was I asked? If you weren't asked, don't speak yet. Because in high-status rooms, unsolicited explanation is often interpreted as you're trying to control perception, or you're trying to manage the room, or you're anxious about what happens if you don't. All of those lower status. Step 3, let the room experience the discomfort. This is the hard part. If someone else is stumbling, let them stumble. Not maliciously. Not with satisfaction. Just, don't save them. Because the moment you save them, you become their support role. And you train the room to treat you as support. Step 4, when you are asked, answer in frameworks, not stories. If the senior person asks you, you deliver. The fact. The risk. The condition that changes action. Then stop. Step 5, if you must clarify, clarify the decision, never the ego. You can clarify the plan. You can clarify the metric. You can clarify the condition. But you don't clarify to protect someone from looking wrong. Because protecting someone's image is emotional labor, and emotional labor is almost always ranked below leadership in high-status environments. Common mistake versus power correction. Mistake: you speak to keep the room comfortable. Correction: you speak only to keep the room aligned. Comfort is optional. Alignment is the job. Now here's the dark nuance. Sometimes your helpfulness is not just habit, it's strategy. If you grew up earning safety by being useful, you learn that being the fixer keeps you valued. And that strategy works, until you enter rooms where value and status are different currencies. In a high-status room, being the fixer can keep you included. But it can also keep you below the ceiling. Because fixers are necessary. Leaders are followed. The ethical boundary here matters. You are not becoming selfish. You are not refusing collaboration. You are refusing to volunteer for a role that erodes your authority. You can still be warm. Still be clear. Still be generous. But you become deliberate about when you speak and what your speaking signals. Because this entire rule, never explain yourself in a high-status room, comes down to one question. Are you speaking as an owner, or as a buffer? And once you stop buffering, you'll notice something uncomfortable. People will test you. Because the room got used to you smoothing things over. When you stop, the friction becomes visible again. That's when the real games start. Ready for next section. 7. The hidden rule: they don't need your story, they need your standard. Think back to the last time you got challenged and felt your brain reach for the story. Not the decision. The story. The sequence of events. The context. The background. The "here's what happened" that lives in your throat like it has to come out or you'll be misunderstood. Rewind to the exact moment the question landed. Not the part where you answered. The part right before you answered, when you felt that tiny internal flinch and your mind started collecting receipts. Because that's what your nervous system does when it senses hierarchy. It gathers proof. It thinks, if I can show my process, I'll be safe. But high-status rooms don't reward process the way you think they do. Not at first. Not under pressure. They don't need your story. They need your standard. That's the hidden rule. A story is what you tell to justify yourself. A standard is what you state to govern the decision. And in high-status rooms, governance is status. Not because people are heartless. Because status environments run on one question more than any other. Can I predict how you decide under pressure? If they can't predict you, they test you. If they can predict you, they trust you. And standards are what make you predictable in the best way. A standard tells the room what you value, what you protect, what you refuse to trade, what changes your mind. A story tells the room you're trying to be understood. You're trying to be forgiven. You're trying to be approved. Even if that's not what you mean. In a room that reads status, intent matters less than signal. And this is the part that stings. You can be completely right and still lose frame if you deliver your rightness as a story. Because stories invite evaluation. Standards invite alignment. That's the difference. Validation bridge. It makes sense that you lead with story. Most of your life, story has been the currency of trust. Story shows you're thoughtful. Story shows you care. Story shows you didn't just decide impulsively. Story feels human. And in normal rooms, it works. But in high-status rooms, story too early reads like self-defense. Because the room isn't asking, are you a good person? It's asking, are you stable enough to lead decisions that affect me? High-status rooms don't want to hear you wrestle. They want to hear what you stand on. They will ask for story later if they need it. But first, they want the spine. Psychology reveal. Here's what's actually happening when you start explaining how you got here. You're placing the decision on a moral scale. You're trying to prove you arrived at it ethically, logically, carefully, so the room won't punish you. That puts you in a subtle child-parent dynamic. You narrate your thinking like a student. They listen like a grader. And once you step into that dynamic, it's hard to climb out without a fight. A standard does something else. A standard says, this decision is not a personality. It's a framework. It shifts the conversation away from you and toward criteria. And criteria is where high-status rooms feel safe. Because criteria lets them disagree without humiliating anyone. Criteria lets them challenge without destabilizing the hierarchy. Criteria lets them say, I want a different trade-off, instead of, I don't trust you. That's why standards create authority without aggression. They remove the ego hook. They stop the room from turning the conversation into, are you competent? And turn it into, what are we optimizing for? Now let's make this real in a scene. Cinematic scenario. Picture this, you're in a meeting room that smells faintly like cold coffee and printer paper. The lighting is bright and flat, the kind that makes everyone look slightly tired even when they're not. On the wall is a screen with a slide that's too clean to hide behind. There are 5 people at the table, but only one of them sets the gravity. They're seated at the end, not because they need the seat, but because the room naturally organizes around them. Their phone is face down, untouched. Their posture is relaxed but not loose, controlled. You're presenting a decision, you cut a feature to hit a deadline. It's a good call. It's the kind of call people claim they want you to make, pragmatic, outcome-driven. But now you have to say it out loud. You say, "We're cutting feature X from this release." Silence. You hold it. You've learned that part. Then the senior person looks at you and says, evenly, "Why?" Not angry. Not curious. Just, direct. A single syllable that opens a trapdoor. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your stomach drops half an inch. Your chest tightens. And your brain starts building the story automatically. We tried, but we had constraints. We didn't have enough resources. The team struggled. The dependencies didn't come through. It wasn't our fault. You can feel the urge to narrate your innocence. Internal conflict hits fast. If I say, deadline, they'll think I'm sloppy. If I say, scope, they'll think I couldn't handle complexity. If I say, resources, they'll think I can't lead. If I don't explain fully, they'll assume I'm hiding something. 3 seconds. A full courtroom drama in your head. The mistake is what most people do. You start telling the story. So the reason is we ran into some delays with Team B, and we were waiting on inputs, and we tried a few different approaches, and we didn't want to risk quality, and also last quarter we saw that shipping late. As you talk, your voice gets slightly faster. Not panicked, but eager. You're trying to make the room understand you before it judges you. And you can see the frame tilt. The senior person's eyes don't soften. They stay neutral. They lean back a fraction, like you've confirmed something, you're in justification mode. Someone else at the table glances toward them, then back at you. Micro-alliance behavior. They're tracking where the power is. You keep going. And we felt like, given the constraints, it made the most sense. The senior person interrupts, calm and surgical, so you couldn't execute. Your stomach drops harder. Because that's not what you said. But stories are easy to summarize incorrectly. And now you're forced to defend the summary instead of leading the decision. No, we could execute, but what I mean is. What I mean is. The sound of someone trying to climb back up after sliding down. Now, same question, different move. They look at you and say, why? You feel the story rising. And you let it pass. You answer with a standard. We cut it to protect the release date and quality threshold we committed to. Then you stop. 1 sentence. 2 priorities. A commitment. Silence. 3 seconds that feel longer than they are. The senior person's eyes narrow slightly, not in anger, in focus. Their posture shifts forward just a hair, like they've found the real conversation. They ask, what quality threshold? Now you explain, but you're not explaining yourself. You're explaining the standard. We don't ship with a failure rate above X on the core flow. Feature X pushed us over. We can ship it next sprint without compromising core stability. Stop. The room shifts. One person nods. Another starts taking notes again. The conversation becomes practical. The senior person says, what would change your mind? And now you're in the position you want, not defending your character, but governing a decision. If we get the dependency by Wednesday and core tests stay green, we can keep it. Otherwise it ships next sprint. Stop. Aftermath, the meeting continues, but the energy is different. Nobody is evaluating your worth anymore. They're negotiating trade-offs. Because you gave them something high-status rooms crave, a predictable decision spine. Tactical breakdown. Here's the move you can use immediately, without becoming cold. Step 1, translate why into what standard did you use. Even if they didn't ask it that way, that's what you answer. Not, here's the saga. Here's the standard. Step 2, use the standard sentence. One sentence that includes the decision, the priority, the constraint/threshold. Examples. We did X to protect Y under Z. We chose X because it optimizes Y while avoiding Z. We're doing X because it keeps us within Y. If Z changes, we revisit. Step 3, stop. You're not stopping to play games. You're stopping to prevent your nervous system from turning the meeting into a self-defense documentary. Step 4, offer conditions, not excuses. If you want to show nuance, do it as conditions. If the dependency arrives by Wednesday, we keep it. If not, it ships next sprint. That sounds decisive and flexible. Excuses sound like pleading. Conditions sound like leadership. Step 5, only tell the story if asked, and tell it as evidence, not apology. If someone says, walk me through what happened, you can. But you don't narrate emotion. You narrate facts that support the standard. Short, clean, bounded. Dark layer and nuance. Here's the uncomfortable part. Some people will try to drag you back into story because story gives them leverage. If you're telling a story, they can interrupt it, reframe it, or imply you're hiding something. They can keep you talking until you stumble. They can make you prove yourself publicly. Standards remove that leverage. And that's why certain personalities resist them. They'll say things like, okay, but why did you really do it? Or, walk me through your thinking. And if you panic, you'll comply by spilling. The ethical boundary matters here. You're not refusing transparency. You're refusing to be placed in a courtroom when what you're doing is decision-making. If the room needs details to prevent harm, you provide them. If your decision affects stakeholders, you own the impact. But you do not trade your frame for approval. Because once you train people that your decisions come with a required confession, they'll keep demanding confessions. Standards train a different relationship. You decide. You name criteria. You accept challenge on criteria. You adjust when criteria changes. That's leadership without theatrics. And knowing this rule still isn't enough. Because the next layer is where it gets sharper, how to speak in short sentences without sounding defensive, vague, or arrogant, how to compress without losing warmth. Ready for next section. 8. Watch how status speaks in short sentences. Watch what happens when someone high status answers a hard question with a sentence so short it almost feels incomplete. Notice how your body reacts as you listen. A tiny irritation, sometimes. A weird admiration. A slight confusion, because you're used to believing that responsibility sounds like detail, and detail sounds like effort. Now notice what the room does. Nobody says, could you elaborate, right away. They pause. They absorb. They adjust themselves around the sentence like it's a fixed object. That's the part people miss. High-status speech often doesn't persuade by piling evidence. It persuades by landing. And landing is not about volume. It's about finality. Not arrogance. Finality. There's a micro-timing to it that you can actually watch if you stop listening for content and start watching for physics. They say the sentence. They stop. They let the silence do the work. And the room, almost against its will, has to respond to the structure they just set. This is why saying less isn't a style choice in high-status rooms. It's a position. Because the person who can hold the room with a short sentence is signaling one thing above everything. I'm not afraid of being evaluated. And that signal is contagious. Your brain wants to reject this at first because it feels unfair. You think, but what about nuance? What about accuracy? What about being thorough? All valid. And yet, you already know the truth because you've lived it. You can be the most thorough person in the room and still be treated like you're pleading. You can be the least thorough person in the room and still be treated like you're leading. So the question isn't, is it fair? The question is, what are they reading when you speak? Because the room is not just hearing your words. It's hearing whether you believe your words deserve to take up space. Short sentences work in high-status rooms for a simple reason. They reduce your exposure. The longer you talk, the more opportunities you create to hedge, apologize, contradict yourself, or show fear. Short sentences don't give your nervous system time to leak. And that's why they feel powerful. But here's the trap. Most people try to imitate short sentences and end up sounding like a smug robot. Because they copy the compression, but they don't copy the structure. They cut words without building the spine underneath. So it sounds abrupt, or vague, or performative. The goal here isn't to talk less. The goal is to compress with structure. That's what makes it high status instead of cold. Here's what short high-status sentences usually contain, even when they sound simple. A decision. A standard. A boundary. A condition. And when one of those is present, the sentence lands. When none of those are present, the sentence just sounds short. There's a difference. Validation bridge. If you're the kind of person who explains well, this will feel like you're being asked to amputate your best skill. Because you associate clarity with care. You associate detail with competence. You associate showing your work with integrity. That belief is not wrong. It's just context dependent. In high-status rooms, integrity is not proven by how much you say. It's proven by whether your decision framework is coherent. A short sentence can carry more integrity than a long explanation, if it's anchored. Psychology reveal. Here's what's actually happening when you speak in short, structured sentences. You're doing two things at once. You're giving the room something it can't easily distort. You're forcing the room to reveal its real concern through follow-up questions. Long explanations let the room choose what to attack. Short structured sentences force the room to show its hand. Because if they disagree, they have to disagree with a standard. They have to name priorities. They can't just keep you talking until you sound uncertain. That's why this is a power rule, not a communication tip. Now let's put you inside the moment where this matters most. Cinematic scenario. Picture this, you're in a high-status room where the ceiling lights are too bright and the windows are too clean. The table is long enough that voices feel like they're traveling through air that doesn't want to help them. There's a senior leader at the far end, sitting with that calm posture that makes you feel like you're being measured. Two other people sit adjacent, angled slightly toward them, subtle alignment, like the room has a front. You're presenting a plan with risk. It's not reckless, but it has consequences. Which means the room's default posture is test. You deliver the decision. We're moving forward with option A. You stop. You hold the silence. So far, you're doing it right. Then the senior leader asks, what if it fails? That question lands in your body like a cold coin dropped down your spine. Because, what if it fails, is never just about failure. It's about blame. Your nervous system hears, if this goes wrong, will you collapse or will you own it? Your instinct says, explain everything. Cover yourself. Show all the contingency planning so nobody can accuse you later of being careless. You feel the internal monologue start. If I don't outline every risk, they'll think I didn't consider them. If I don't show mitigation, they'll think I'm gambling. If I don't reassure them, they'll pull the decision away from me. And the mistake most people make is predictable. They start speaking like they're trying to build a legal defense. Okay, so if it fails, we have a few contingencies, and we've thought about that, and the reason we think it won't fail is because the data from last quarter suggests. As you speak, you feel yourself drifting. Not off topic, off posture. Your voice picks up speed. Your sentences stack. You add caveats to protect your image. And the room starts to lean back. Not dramatically. Subtly. Like they've placed you in the needs to convince us role. Now watch the power move. Same question, what if it fails? You answer with one short sentence that contains a boundary and a condition. If it fails, we roll back within 24 hours and pause expansion. Stop. That's it. No essay. No apology. No defensive story. Just a clean containment boundary. Now look at the senior leader. Their eyes stay on you, but the energy changes. They're not watching you squirm anymore. They're evaluating the framework. They ask, what triggers rollback? Now you answer, still short. If core metrics drop below X, or error rate crosses Y. Stop. The room starts taking notes again. Because you didn't try to suit them with a narrative. You gave them control points. And control points are what high-status rooms actually want. The meeting continues. Another person asks, why 24 hours? Now you add one line. Because beyond that, customer impact compounds. Stop. You're not withholding. You're pacing. You're not being vague. You're being structured. And notice what just happened. You spoke in short sentences, but you didn't sound like a tyrant or a robot. Because every short sentence carried a decision artifact, boundary, trigger, condition. That's why it landed. Tactical breakdown. Here's how you learn to speak in short sentences without sounding arrogant or empty. Step 1. Decide what kind of sentence you're delivering. There are 4 high-status sentence types. You don't need all of them at once. Choose one. Decision sentence, we're doing X. Standard sentence, because it optimizes Y under Z. Boundary sentence, we won't do A / we're not debating B. Condition sentence, if C happens, we change course. If you can deliver those cleanly, you don't need long explanations. Step 2, make your first answer a boundary or condition, not a story. Hard questions in high-status rooms often want containment more than reasoning. What if it fails, wants rollback triggers. Why this approach, wants the standard. Why now, wants the condition. So answer with the artifact they need. Stepules of thumb. If they ask about risk, give boundaries / triggers. If they ask about why, give standards. If they ask about timing, give conditions. Step 3, stop after one sentence. Your nervous system will beg you to keep talking. Don't obey it. Stopping doesn't make you rude. It makes you legible. Step 4. Answer follow-ups exactly. Follow-ups are a gift. They tell you what the room actually cares about. So answer only that. Not your whole internal movie. Step 5. Add warmth through tone, not through extra words. Warmth is not the same as verbosity. Warmth is a steady voice. A neutral face. A lack of panic. A willingness to clarify when asked. You can say a short sentence without being sharp. You can say, "We're rolling back within 24 hours," with calm, collaborative energy. Common mistake versus power correction. Mistake: trying to sound high status by being abrupt. Correction: being concise because your framework is complete. Abrupt is short with no spine. Concise is short with structure. Dark layer and nuance. Here's the part that gets uncomfortable. When you start speaking this way, some people will accuse you, subtly, of not being transparent. They'll say things like, "Can you elaborate? Walk me through your thinking. Help me understand." Sometimes that's genuine. Sometimes it's a pull back into the old hierarchy where you perform diligence and they perform evaluation. So you don't resist transparency. You resist the frame where transparency is demanded as a submission ritual. How do you do that ethically? You offer structure first, then detail. I can. The headline is X under Y, want the reasoning, the risks, or the dependencies. That one line does something powerful without being aggressive. It shows you're willing to explain, but you're not willing to spill. You're not hiding. You're governing. And once you can do that, you'll notice the next test. Because some rooms don't challenge you with why or what if. They challenge you with a question that's shaped like a compliment but functions like a hook, something that tries to make you justify your confidence. That's where the room tests whether your clarity is real, or whether it collapses into performance. Ready for next section. 9. The room tests you with innocent questions. There's a specific kind of shift that happens when a high-status room decides to test you without looking like it's testing you. It doesn't come with raised voices. It doesn't come with confrontation. It comes with politeness. A question delivered in a calm tone. A slight smile that doesn't reach the eyes. A phrase that sounds collaborative, even flattering, until you feel the impact in your body and realize it wasn't a request. It was a probe. The air changes right after it's asked. People's postures adjust. Someone's shoulders settle back like they're getting comfortable watching. Someone else stops typing. Not because they're listening harder, because they're waiting to see whether you wobble. And the question itself is usually harmless on paper. Just curious, who made that call? Help me understand what data you're basing that on. Can you walk me through how you arrived there? Did you run that by anyone? Each one can be sincere. Sometimes it is. But in a high-status room, those questions often carry a second layer that you can feel even if you can't prove it. Are you the kind of person who owns decisions, or the kind of person who needs permission? That's why your body reacts before your mind can label it. A small tightening around the eyes. A quick stomach drop. That subtle urge to prove you're not reckless, not arrogant, not inexperienced. Because an innocent question is the cleanest weapon in a status environment. If you answer it the wrong way, you demote yourself voluntarily. Not because you gave the wrong information. Because you answered from the wrong posture. Here's the hidden rule: in high-status rooms, many questions are not information requests. They're frame offers. The question is trying to define what this conversation is. Is it a review where you are accountable and steady? Or is it a trial where you are guilty until you narrate your innocence? If you accept the trial frame, you start explaining yourself. If you hold the review frame, you answer with standards, boundaries, and conditions. That's the difference between being questioned and being tested. Validation bridge. It makes sense that you treat these questions like danger, because they're designed to feel safe while applying pressure. They don't look like attacks, which means you can't defend against them directly without looking paranoid. So you do what smart people do: you overcomply. You provide context. You soften. You add disclaimers. You try to be transparent enough that nobody can accuse you later of hiding. That's rational. But in a high-status room, overcompliance reads as fear. And fear is the one thing you cannot afford to leak. Psychology reveal. The real danger of innocent questions is that they force you to reveal what you believe about your own authority. If you answer like someone asking to be accepted, the room learns: press here and they'll start bargaining. If you answer like someone governing a decision, the room learns: press here and they'll stay structured. High-status rooms don't respect people who never get challenged. They respect people who stay stable during challenge. And innocent questions are the preferred way to create that challenge without creating open conflict. Now let's put you inside the moment, because this is where most people lose the room while thinking they're being professional. Cinematic scenario. Picture this: you're in a large conference room with a long table that makes every conversation feel like a performance. The lighting is bright and even, no shadows to hide in. A glass wall runs along one side, and you can see a blurred reflection of the room, like you're being observed from a second angle. You're presenting a plan. It's clean. It's reasonable. You've done your work. A senior leader sits near the head of the table, relaxed posture, hands still, expression neutral in a way that feels deliberate. Two people who matter sit adjacent, angled toward them. One person you don't trust sits across from you with a polite face and alert eyes. Setup: you finish your summary and deliver. The decision in owner format. We're moving forward with option A because it hits the metric we own without external dependencies. If Team B commits to a 48-hour turnaround, we revisit. You stop. The room is quiet for a second. Not hostile, evaluative. Trigger: the person you don't trust leans in slightly and smiles in a friendly way. Just curious, did you run this by anyone before deciding? Not accusatory. Almost casual. Almost helpful. But your body reacts like you just stepped onto ice. You feel a small tightening in your chest. Your mind flashes a warning: if you answer wrong, you'll look rogue. Internal conflict hits fast. If I say yes, they'll ask who, and then judge whether it was the right person. If I say no, they'll frame me as impulsive. If I explain, I'll sound defensive. If I don't explain, I'll sound arrogant. This calculation happens in 3 seconds, and you can feel the pressure rising behind your ribs as you search for the safest sentence. The mistake is what most people do. You start narrating. Yeah, so we discussed it with a few folks informally, and we also had some conversations last week, and the reason we didn't do a formal review is because the timeline. You hear the first, because, come out. Then the second. You add names like receipts. I spoke to X, and Y, and also we got input from. And as you list, you feel it, you're not answering the question anymore. You're trying to prove you belong. The room shifts. The senior leader leans back slightly. Someone stops typing. The person who asked the question keeps the polite smile, but their eyes brighten a fraction, not with kindness, with leverage. They found the button. They say, still politely, interesting. So it wasn't formally reviewed. Now you're stuck inside their frame. You rush to correct it. Well, what I mean is, given the deadline, we didn't want to slow things down. Your voice gets a touch faster, a touch higher. You're explaining yourself. And the room learns something, under pressure, you overcomply. Now the power move. Same question, did you run this by anyone before deciding? You hold still. You don't treat it like an accusation. You treat it like a normal operational question with a clean operational answer. Yes, relevant stakeholders. Stop. 2 words that matter, relevant stakeholders. You did not list names. You did not narrate. You did not plead. The person who asked tries again, still smiling, which stakeholders? Now you answer without surrendering frame. The ones who own the dependency and the metric. If you want specific names, I can share after the meeting. Stop. 3 seconds of silence. Now watch the room. The senior leader's attention sharpens, not against you, toward the structure. Because you just signaled something important. You are not here to perform your social network as proof of legitimacy. You are here to govern a decision. The senior leader asks, did Team B sign off? Now that's a real question. You answer cleanly. They haven't signed off. They've given a best-case timeline. Our plan assumes worst case and contains rollback triggers. Stop. Aftermath, the meeting continues, but the test dissolves into execution. The room moves from, can we control this person, to, can we control outcomes? Because you refused the game without being rude. You didn't fight the question. You answered it like an owner. Tactical breakdown. Here's how to handle innocent questions without spiraling into explanations. Step 1, hear the hidden frame. When you feel that body flinch, assume the question might be a frame offer. Prove you deserve authority. Your job is to answer without accepting that premise. Step 2, answer at the correct altitude. Don't answer lower than the question. If they ask process, answer process. If they ask authority, answer standard. If they ask permission, answer ownership. Examples. Did you run it by anyone? Yes, relevant stakeholders. Who approved this? I own the decision. Approvals are for the dependency points. Where did you get that number? From the latest validated dataset. If you want the source, I'll share it. Step 3, don't list names unless it's operationally required. Name listing is the fastest way to turn the conversation into status theater. If names matter for accountability, provide them calmly. If names don't matter, don't donate them as proof of legitimacy. Step 4, offer a boundary without heat. If you want specifics, I can share after the meeting. That sentence is a calm boundary. It prevents the room from turning your update into a social trial. Step 5, redirect to criteria. If the question keeps fishing, redirect to the decision framework. The key question is whether we're optimizing for speed or dependency risk. Which priority do you want? Now they have to talk about reality instead of testing you. Dark layer and nuance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people ask innocent questions because it's safer than direct opposition. They don't want to challenge your plan openly, so they challenge your legitimacy quietly. If you respond by over-explaining, you give them what they want, a public demonstration that you can be pulled off center. But there's also an ethical boundary here. Sometimes those questions are sincere. Sometimes the room genuinely needs to know who was consulted, what data you used, whether a risk was reviewed. So you don't become evasive. You become structured. You answer what's necessary, at the right altitude, without turning it into an apology. Because the point isn't to win. The point is to stay in a frame where decisions are governed by standards, not by who can make you squirm. And once you can do that, the next layer shows up. Because there's an even subtler leak, tiny language markers that quietly downgrade you even when your plan is solid. Words that make you sound like you're asking permission for your own competence. Ready for next section. 10. Explain versus declare, the one word that changes the frame. You've heard yourself say it. It slips out so naturally you barely notice. A small word, a soft opener, a polite cushion you put in front of your sentence like padding so nobody can accuse you of being too much. And the room doesn't react dramatically. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't laugh. But something in the air shifts anyway. Because high-status rooms don't just listen to what you said. They listen to what your first word reveals about your relationship to your own authority. The one word that changes the frame more than almost anything else is this. I think. Or its cousins. Maybe. I feel like. I just. I'm not sure but. Correct me if I'm wrong. Those are not humility. Not in a high-status room. They are status markers. They tell the room, this sentence is negotiable. Sometimes negotiable is correct, brainstorming, collaboration, uncertainty. But if you use those markers when you're stating a decision, you don't sound thoughtful. You sound unowned. And the room hears, press here and they'll retreat. This is why two people can deliver the same idea and get different outcomes. One says, I think we should do option A. The other says, we're doing option A. Same plan. Different frame. The first invites debate. The second establishes direction. And here's the thing no one admits, in high-status rooms, debate is not neutral. Debate is hierarchy. The person who gets to debate is often the person who is above the decision. So when you add, I think, you're not being polite. You're putting yourself below the room. Validation bridge. It makes sense that you use softeners. You've been punished before for sounding too sure. You've been called arrogant, intense, or difficult. You learned that hedging keeps you safe. It keeps people comfortable. It keeps you from becoming a target. And in many environments, that's smart. But high-status rooms don't reward comfort first. They reward clarity. And clarity has a sound. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It's simply declared. Psychology reveal. Here's what happens in the listener's brain when you hedge. They don't consciously think, this person is low status. They think something more subtle. This is not settled. This can be pushed. This can be revised if I apply pressure. And then they do what high-status rooms always do to unsettled things. They test. They add questions, objections, alternate proposals. Not because your idea is bad, but because you signaled it's not anchored. A declaration, by contrast, forces a different response. A declaration makes the room decide whether it agrees with the standard, not whether it can destabilize the speaker. It moves the conversation from, "Is this person credible?" to, "Are we aligned?" That's why this is not a language hack. It's a frame decision. Are you explaining to be accepted? Or declaring a standard you're willing to be accountable for? Cinematic scenario. Picture this: you're in a high-status room with a long table and a screen at the front. The lights are bright enough to flatten everyone's expressions. There's a faint smell of citrus cleaner and coffee. You've been asked to recommend a direction. The room is tired. People want resolution, but they also want someone else to absorb the blame if it goes wrong. The senior leader looks at you and says, "So what do you recommend?" That question sounds simple. But you feel the hook inside it. Because, recommend, is often code for, "Put your name on this so we can judge your spine." Your body reacts: small stomach drop, throat tightness. The internal monologue starts. If I say it too strongly, they'll push back just to check me. If I hedge, they'll treat me like I'm unsure. If I give too many options, I'll look indecisive. 3 seconds. You choose the safe response. You say, "I think we should go with option A." And the moment the words leave your mouth, you can feel it, like you just handed the room a handle. The senior leader doesn't even need to challenge you directly. They just tilt their head slightly. "Why do you think that?" And now you're explaining. You start narrating your reasoning. You add, "because." You list factors. You try to be thorough. But the room has already framed it as, your opinion, not a governed decision. So every sentence after that is treated like something that can be debated, diminished, or overridden. Someone else at the table says, "I'm not sure that's the right call." And now your recommendation becomes a personal disagreement. Not a standards conversation. You can feel yourself shrinking into defense. Now replay it with the power move. Same question: what do you recommend? You answer without the hedge, but with a standard. We should go with option A. Then you add the spine in one sentence. It protects the deadline while keeping execution controllable. Stop. No, I think. No, maybe. No, I feel like. Just a recommendation anchored to criteria. Now watch the room. The senior leader's eyes stay on you, but the energy changes. They're not testing your confidence anymore. They're evaluating the framework. They ask, "What's the risk?" You answer in a boundary/condition sentence. Risk is dependency delay. If team B can't commit by Wednesday, we ship without feature X. Stop. Now the room has to engage with trade-offs instead of your personality. Someone says, "Why Wednesday?" You answer, "Because beyond that, we lose the window." Stop. The meeting becomes operational, not personal. Aftermath: your recommendation stands as a structure, not a vibe. Tactical breakdown. Here's how to shift from explaining to declaring without sounding like a jerk. Step 1: remove permission-seeking openers. Replace "I think," "I feel like," "maybe," "just," "I'm not sure but," with "we should." The right move is "we're going to." The decision is "our standard here is." Step 2: add one standard sentence. A declaration without a standard can sound arrogant. A declaration with a standard sounds like leadership. Format: decision plus because. Standard. We're doing X because it optimizes Y under Z. Step 3. Keep warmth in the delivery. Warmth is not hedging. Warmth is steadiness and respect. You can say, "We should go with option A," in a calm tone that signals collaboration, not dominance. Step 4. Use conditions to show flexibility without folding. If the constraint changes, we revisit. That tells the room you're not emotionally attached. You're framework attached. Step 5. Know when hedging is appropriate. This matters ethically. If you truly don't know, don't fake certainty. High-status rooms respect clean uncertainty more than messy confidence. Clean uncertainty sounds like, "I don't have enough data to recommend yet. Here's what we need by tomorrow to decide." That's still a declaration of reality. Dark layer and nuance. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some rooms punish directness, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens someone else's control. If you start declaring standards, someone who prefers vague power will push back by calling you too confident, too rigid, or not collaborative. That's a frame battle. Your job isn't to argue with the label. Your job is to keep the decision anchored to criteria. I'm happy to adjust if we want to optimize for a different priority. Which one? That line disarms the personality attack and forces the room back into trade-offs. You're not defending your tone. You're governing the work. And now we hit the next layer, the one that separates real mastery from performative confidence. Because there are times you should explain. If you never explain, you become opaque. You become risky. You become arrogant. So the question becomes, when is explanation leadership, and when is it submission? Ready for next section. 11. The ethical line, when not explaining becomes arrogance. The voice in your head shifts at this stage. At first, it was panic, if I don't explain, they'll misread me. Now it becomes something else, more slippery, more social. If I stop explaining, will I sound like a jerk? Will I look arrogant? Will people think I'm hiding something? Because you've seen the other side of this rule. You've seen people who never explain and call it confidence. They give short answers like they're above the conversation. They speak in declarations with no accountability behind them. They weaponize brevity as a way to avoid scrutiny. And you can feel the difference when you're in a room with someone like that. It doesn't feel like leadership. It feels like a wall. So if you're smart, and you are, you hesitate. You don't want to become that. You don't want to trade over explaining for opacity. You don't want to become cold just to protect your status. And that's exactly why this section matters. Because, never explain yourself in a high-status room, is not a license to withhold. It's a rule about what you're paying for with your words. If you explain to transfer understanding, that's leadership. If you explain to buy legitimacy, that's submission. Same behavior. Different motive. Different signal. And high-status rooms can feel the difference. Not always consciously. But they can feel it. Recognition hook. Think back to a time you tried to follow this rule and it backfired. You gave a short answer. You held silence. You didn't overdefend. And someone's face tightened. Not in awe. In irritation. They said something like, "Okay, but can you actually explain?" Or, "That's not an answer." Or the one that stings because it sounds polite. "Help me understand your thinking." And in that moment, you felt trapped between two fears. If I explain now, I collapse into the old pattern. If I don't explain, I look arrogant. This is where people either swing back into over-explaining, or they swing too far into stone-faced minimalism. Both are failures. The mastery is the middle. The mastery is explaining without explaining yourself. Validation bridge. It makes sense that you fear being seen as arrogant. In many environments, directness gets punished. Socially, people say they want clarity, but they emotionally reward softness. So you learn to cushion, to qualify, to preempt. And when you remove that cushioning, it can feel like you're breaking an unspoken social contract. But high-status rooms are not governed by the same social contract. They're governed by accountability. And accountability requires two things. A standard. Enough transparency for others to trust the standard is real. So you don't get to hide. You just don't get to plead. Psychology reveal. Here's the ethical line in one sentence. You can be concise about decisions, but you cannot be vague about accountability. High-status rooms tolerate brevity when they can see the structure underneath it. They tolerate "we're doing option A" if they can also see what metric you're optimizing, what risks you're accepting, what triggers change, who owns the outcome. When those are clear, brevity reads as leadership. When those are missing, brevity reads as arrogance. That's the difference. Arrogance says, "Trust me because I said so." Leadership says, "Trust the framework. And here's how we'll know if it's wrong." So the rule is not, never explain. The rule is, don't let explanation become a submission ritual. When someone asks for thinking, you give them thinking. But you give it in a way that maintains frame. You don't narrate your anxiety. You don't confess your innocence. You don't turn the meeting into a moral defense of your competence. You explain like a pilot explaining a flight plan. Clear. Bounded. Accountable. Cinematic scenario. Picture this: you're in a high-status meeting where everyone looks calm, but you can feel impatience under the surface like a low electrical current. The senior leader is practical. They don't like long updates. They like clean decisions. But they also hate surprises. You're presenting a change that will affect another team. You already declared the decision. We're removing feature X from this release. You stopped. You held. Silence. You stayed steady. A beat passes. Then the senior leader says, "Explain." Just that. Explain. No anger. But the word is sharp. Like they're cutting through something they don't trust. Trigger, your body reacts. Stomach drop. Throat tightness. A small heat in your face. Internal conflict. If I explain too much, I lose frame. If I don't explain enough, I look arrogant. If I get defensive, I look weak. If I stay too short, I look evasive. 3 seconds. This is where most people choose one of two mistakes. Mistake number 1, collapse into submission. You start talking fast. Okay, so the reason is we had delays, and Team B didn't respond, and we didn't want to risk quality, and we tried a few different approaches. You're narrating your innocence. You're trying to prove you didn't fail. The senior leader's eyes glaze slightly, not bored, but disengaged. Because now you're giving them a story they have to interpret. They interrupt with a summary that hurts. So you couldn't deliver. Now you're defending your competence. Frame lost. Mistake number 2, swing into opacity. You say, coldly, it's the right call. Silence. The room stiffens. Because now you're asking them to trust you without evidence. That's arrogance. And high-status rooms punish arrogance not because they're offended, but because it's risky. They can't predict you. Now the power move. The senior leader says, explain. You don't comply with story. You comply with structure. You answer in 3 bounded lines. Standard, we don't ship if core failure rate exceeds X. Reality, feature X pushes us over that threshold this sprint. Plan, we ship core, and feature X goes next sprint with rollback triggers removed. Stop. Now watch what happens. The senior leader's posture shifts forward slightly. Their eyes sharpen, not toward you personally, toward the framework. They ask a real question. What threshold are we at now? You answer. We're at X plus Y. We need to be below X. Stop. Another real question. Who owns the recovery? You answer. I do. If we miss the threshold by Wednesday, we cut. If we hit it, we include. Stop. Aftermath, the room becomes operational. Because you didn't refuse transparency. You refused the submission ritual. You gave them what they needed, standards, reality, plan, ownership, conditions. That's ethical power. Tactical breakdown. Here's the formula for explaining without explaining yourself. Step 1, lead with standards, not emotion. Don't start with, because the team struggled, or, because we didn't have time. Start with, our standard is X. We don't do Y. We ship only if Z is true. Standards feel like leadership. Excuses feel like pleading. Step 2, state reality in 1 line. This is the current state. Here's what the data shows. Here's what the dependency timeline is. No drama. No apology. Just reality. Step 3, state the plan and the trigger. Here's what we're doing. If X happens, we do A. If not, we do B. This is where trust lives. Step 4, own the outcome. I own it. My team owns it. Here's who is accountable. Ownership is the antidote to arrogance. Because arrogance avoids ownership. Step 5, stop. Let the room ask for what it needs. If they want deeper reasoning, they'll ask. If they want risk mitigation, they'll ask. Your job is not to dump your internal process to preempt judgment. Your job is to maintain a stable, transparent decision spine. Dark layer and nuance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people demand explanations as a way to keep you below them. They want you to perform diligence because it puts them in the role of evaluator. If you comply with a story, they win that role. If you comply with structure, you keep frame and still give transparency. That's the balance. And ethically, it matters because you should not use this to hide mistakes. If you messed up, you name it cleanly. We missed the dependency. Here's what we changed to prevent repeat. Short. Owned. Corrective. No self-flagellation. No defense. That's leadership. So. The line is simple. Concise decisions. Transparent accountability. No pleading. And once you can do that, you're ready for one of the most effective moves in the entire system. Because sometimes the room isn't challenging your plan. Sometimes they're challenging your right to have a plan. And the cleanest way to handle that isn't a speech. It's a question. Ready for next section. 12. The one question move that keeps you high status. You've been in the moment where a question lands on you like a hook. Not an aggressive hook. A polite one. The kind of question that sounds reasonable but makes your body tense because you can feel what it's trying to do, pull you into a frame where you defend yourself. Why would you do it that way? Who said that was the right metric? Are you sure that's the priority? And your nervous system does what it always does when it senses hierarchy. It wants to explain. It wants to justify. It wants to build a case so nobody can lower you. But here's the move that keeps you high status without turning you into a brick wall. Instead of explaining, you ask one question that forces the real criteria into the open. Not a sarcastic question. Not a passive-aggressive one. A clean question that changes the evaluation lens. Because most power games in high-status rooms run on hidden criteria. People don't say what they're optimizing for. They just push. And if you respond by explaining, you accept their hidden criteria and try to win inside it. That's how you lose. The one question move does something else. It makes the criteria explicit. And once criteria is explicit, the room has to behave like adults. They have to pick priorities instead of testing your spine. Recognition hook. Think back to the last time you explained yourself into a corner. Someone asked a why question, and you answered with reasoning. Then they pushed again. You added more context. They pushed again. You added more detail. And suddenly you were arguing about something you didn't even believe was the real issue. You could feel it happening, the conversation drifting away from outcomes into optics, away from decisions into social positioning. And you kept talking because you thought talking would fix it. But talking was the trap. Because the trap wasn't lack of clarity. The trap was hidden criteria. Validation bridge. It makes sense you don't ask questions in those moments. Questions feel risky. They can sound confrontational. They can sound like you're challenging authority. They can sound like you're deflecting. So you do the safer thing, you answer. You explain. You try to be cooperative. But in high-status rooms, over-cooperation can be interpreted as weakness. Not morally, structurally. Because the person asking the question is often not asking for information. They're asking to see if you'll accept their frame. So you need a response that is cooperative and frame protective. That response is a question. Psychology reveal. Here's what the one question move actually does psychologically. It slows the interaction and forces the room to name what it wants. It repositions you from defendant to co-author of the decision. It prevents you from arguing inside someone else's assumptions. Because when someone challenges you, there are only two possibilities. They disagree with your criteria. They disagree with your facts. If you don't know which one it is, any explanation you give is a gamble. The question reveals which one they're actually attacking. That's why it's powerful. Now let's put you inside the scene where this move saves you. Cinematic scenario. Picture this, you're in a high-status room right after lunch, the kind of time where the room's patience is thin and people want conclusions, not stories. The lighting is a little too bright. The air is slightly cool. You can hear the faint hum of the projector. You're presenting a decision that shifts resources. Someone will lose something. Which means someone will fight, even if they do it politely. A senior person across the table, sharp, controlled, looks at your slide and says, "Why are we prioritizing this over the other initiative?" The question is calm. But you can feel the underlying tension. This isn't about understanding. It's about power. Your body reacts, tightness in the stomach, heat in the face, the reflex to defend. Your mind starts generating an essay. Because this one has better ROI. Because the other initiative is riskier. Because stakeholders asked for this. Because we can ship faster. Internal conflict. If I justify with ROI, they'll attack the numbers. If I justify with stakeholder pressure, they'll say I'm being political. If I justify with speed, they'll call it short-term thinking. Whatever I say, they can cut it. That's because you're about to play inside their hidden criteria without knowing what it is. The mistake most people make is to start explaining anyway. We're prioritizing it because the expected impact is higher and the timeline is shorter, and also we've gotten feedback from stakeholders that you're building a case. And the senior person does exactly what the room is trained to do to cases. They attack one plank. I don't buy those ROI numbers. Now you're arguing about ROI. But ROI was never the real issue. It was leverage. They wanted to see if they could pull you into a fight where they control the rules. Now the power move. Same question. Why are we prioritizing this over the other initiative? You don't explain. You ask one question that forces criteria. What outcome are we optimizing for here, speed this quarter, or long-term retention? Stop. One question. No heat. No defensiveness. Just a forced choice between criteria. Watch what happens. The senior person pauses. Not because you were clever. Because you just made the hidden thing visible. They have to answer. They say, retention. Now you can answer cleanly without pleading. Then this initiative wins. It moves retention by X without adding dependency risk. The other one is higher variance. Stop. Now the conversation is about reality, not dominance. If they say, speed, you respond differently. Then the other initiative wins, and we should flip. Stop. Either way, you remain high status because you're not protecting your ego, you're protecting the decision framework. The meeting continues, but the power dynamic changed. Because instead of being dragged into defense, you made them reveal the standard they were using to judge you. Aftermath, they stop probing you with vague pressure and start engaging with trade-offs. That's the whole point. Tactical breakdown. Here are the one-question templates that work in high-status rooms without sounding confrontational. 1. Criteria question. What are we optimizing for, X or Y? Examples. Are we optimizing for speed or risk reduction? Is the priority cost or reliability? Do we care more about predictability or maximum upside? 2. Concern question. What concern are you pointing to specifically? This forces specificity. Vague pressure dies in specificity. 3. Assumption question. Which assumption do you disagree with, the data point or the priority? This cleanly separates fact debate from criteria debate. 4. Ownership question. Who owns the outcome we're prioritizing? This recenters accountability and removes status theater. 5. Time horizon question. Are we making a quarterly decision or a strategic decision? A lot of conflict is just mismatched time horizons. Common mistake versus power correction. Mistake: explain your reasoning inside someone else's hidden frame. Correction: ask one question that makes the frame explicit. Dark layer and nuance. Here's where this gets sharp. Some people hate being forced to name criteria, because their power comes from keeping criteria vague. If they say the criteria out loud, they can be held to it later. So they might respond with irritation. Just answer the question. That's the test. You don't escalate. You stay calm. Your question depends on which priority you want to optimize. Stop. That line is respectful and structural. You're not refusing. You're clarifying the decision lens. Ethically, this move is clean because it improves decision quality. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't shame. It doesn't dominate. It forces honesty. And once you can do this, you're ready for the next level of difficulty. Because sometimes the room doesn't just challenge your criteria. Sometimes it smuggles in a premise designed to lower you, an assumption inside a question that you're supposed to accept without noticing. If you answer the question directly, you accept the premise. If you don't, you keep frame. Ready for next section. 13. The calm boundary. I'm not debating the premise. Think back to the last time someone asked you a question that wasn't really a question. Not a direct challenge. Something cleaner. A sentence shaped like curiosity, but with an assumption baked into it, an assumption that quietly lowers you if you accept it. Why did you decide to take that risk? Why are you comfortable shipping something incomplete? Why didn't you think of the downstream impact? And you can feel it, the question isn't only about the decision. It's about the premise. It's asking you to agree, implicitly, that you were reckless. That you were careless. That you're late to the obvious. That you're playing catch-up in a room that already knows better. Most people answer the question anyway. Because answering feels cooperative. Professional. Safe. But the second you answer a question built on a degrading premise, you do something expensive. You accept the downgrade. You start arguing from the bottom. And then the room doesn't even have to beat you. You've already moved yourself into the losing position. This section is about the cleanest high-status move you can make without raising your voice. Refuse the premise. Calmly. Then restate your frame. Not with attitude. With structure. Validation bridge. It makes sense that you've been answering these questions your whole life. Because you were trained to treat questions as neutral. To assume good intent. To be open to feedback. And most of the time, that's healthy. But high-status rooms are not pure information environments. They're mixed environments, information plus hierarchy. Which means some questions exist to inform, and some exist to position. If you respond to positioning questions like they're informational, you hand someone free leverage. Psychology reveal. A premise smuggling question works like this. It forces you to choose between two bad outcomes. If you reject it openly, you risk sounding defensive. If you accept it quietly, you risk sounding guilty. So most people choose a third option, explain. They try to prove they weren't reckless, weren't careless, weren't naive. But explanation doesn't remove the premise. It strengthens it, because now you're arguing within it. The high-status move is to step out of the frame entirely. You don't debate whether you're reckless. You restate the standard you used, and you ask the room to debate that. Because standards are discussable. Premises are traps. Cinematic scenario. Picture this, you're in a conference room late in the day. The sunlight outside is low and sharp, cutting through the glass and throwing thin lines across the table. Everyone looks a little tired, but nobody wants to be the first one to loosen their posture. You've just presented a decision. It's defensible. It's owned. You held silence. You spoke in standards. You stayed clean. Then a senior person across the table, calm, polished, leans back and says, "So why did you decide to take that risk?" The tone is neutral. But your body reads the subtext instantly. Because, take that risk, isn't neutral. It's an accusation disguised as a question. It implies you were reckless, and now you need to justify yourself. Trigger. You feel the stomach drop. Not huge. Just enough to wake your nervous system up. Your throat tightens slightly, like your voice has to pass through a narrower gap. Internal conflict lights up. If I answer directly, I'm admitting it was a risk. If I deny it, I sound defensive. If I explain, I'll look guilty. If I stay silent, they'll think I can't respond. 3 seconds. A courtroom forms in your head. Most people make the mistake. They accept the premise and start defending inside it. Well, we didn't really take a risk, what we did was, because the deadline, because the constraints, because the team. You can hear it, you're trying to talk your way out of the word risk, without saying you're talking your way out of it. And the room senses the scramble. The senior person's face stays neutral, but their posture relaxes the way it does when someone has you. Like they've confirmed you can be pulled into apology mode with one loaded word. Someone else at the table tilts their head slightly, watching you talk faster. And now, even if your explanation is perfect, you're still losing. Because you're debating a premise you didn't choose. Now the power move. Same question. So why did you decide to take that risk? You don't flinch outward. You don't harden. You don't get sarcastic. You do something calmer. You refuse the premise with one clean line. I wouldn't frame it as taking a risk. Stop. Silence. Not long. 2 seconds. The room feels it. Because you didn't accept the downgrade. Then you restate your frame. Our standard was, protect core reliability under the deadline. This decision stays inside that boundary. Stop again. Now watch the senior person. They have to adjust. Because the conversation is no longer, why were you reckless? It's, do we agree with the standard and boundary? They ask, more carefully, okay, what boundary? Now you're explaining the framework, not defending your character. Rollback triggers at X and Y. If we cross them, we reverse within 24 hours. Stop. Aftermath, the test dissolves into operational reality. People start asking real questions. Someone starts taking notes. Again. The room stands upright. Not because you dominated. Because you refused to stand in the wrong place. Tactical breakdown. Here's the move, step by step. Step 1, detect premise smuggling. You'll feel it as a body reaction first. Loaded words. Moral framing. Implied incompetence. Why did you finally? Why didn't you think? Why are you comfortable with? Why did you decide to take that risk? Those aren't neutral questions. They're frames. Step 2, refuse the premise in one calm sentence. No speech. No debate. One line. I wouldn't frame it that way. I don't agree with that premise. That's not the trade-off we made. That's not what happened. Then stop. Step 3, restate the standard and boundary. This is where you regain the ground. Our standard is X. Our boundary is Y. Our condition for changing course is Z. You're not dodging. You're governing. Step 4, invite a real disagreement. A high-status line is one that forces honesty. If we want to optimize for a different priority, let's name it. Now the room has to talk about criteria, not vibes. Step 5, never argue about your intent. Premise questions often tempt you to defend your motives. Don't. Motives are slippery. Motives invite moral evaluation. Motives are where status games breed. Stick to standards, evidence, and conditions. Common mistake versus power correction. Mistake, answering the question and accepting the degrading premise. Correction, rejecting the premise, then answering the real concern through standards. Dark layer and nuance. Here's the part that gets uncomfortable. Some people smuggle premises because it's a clean way to establish dominance without looking aggressive. If you accept the premise, they get a quiet win and can repeat the pattern. If you reject the premise, they may escalate, not loudly, but with social pressure. They'll say, "I'm just asking a question." That's the follow-up trap. You don't argue about whether it was just a question. You stay calm and return to structure. You are, and the right question is which risk boundary we're comfortable with. Here's ours. That's it. No heat. No defensiveness. No lecture. Ethically, this matters because you're not using a trick. You're improving the quality of the conversation. You're refusing to let decisions be evaluated through insinuation. And once you can do this, you unlock the next skill, recovery. Because sometimes you won't catch the premise in time. Sometimes you'll already have over-explained, already accepted the frame, already started bargaining. The question becomes, how do you pull yourself back up mid-meeting without making it worse? Ready for next section. 14. The repair, what to do after you already over-explained. Watch what happens in your body right after you realize you've done it again. You started strong. You answered cleanly. You held silence. And then someone pushed, softly, politely, and your nervous system reached for the old reflex like it was a fire extinguisher. You began explaining. Not one sentence. 3. 5. 10. You heard yourself stacking, because, listing details that weren't asked for, trying to preempt objections you couldn't even see. And then, midstream, you felt it. That quiet internal drop. I'm doing it. I'm over-explaining. I'm losing the room. Your throat tightens. Your face warms. Part of you wants to keep going, because stopping feels like admitting weakness. Another part wants to shut down completely. And the room is still watching. This is the moment that matters most. Because high-status people aren't people who never wobble. They're people who can recover without collapsing. So this section is about the repair move, the way you pull yourself back to frame after you've already started leaking it. And here's the first thing to understand. The worst repair is to repair by explaining more. That's what most people do. They feel themselves slipping, and they try to fix the slip by talking faster and giving even more context, as if more words will buy back authority. It doesn't. It just confirms the role you're trying to escape: applicant, defendant, translator. The real repair is not adding. It's compressing. Recognition hook. Think back to the last time you corrected yourself in a meeting by doubling down on detail. You felt the room drifting, so you said, "Let me clarify." And then you clarified for 2 minutes. You added more nuance. You tried to make the logic airtight. And afterward you felt hollow, because you could tell the clarity didn't help. It made you look anxious. It made you look like you needed the room's approval for the decision to be real. That's because clarity wasn't the issue. Frame was. Validation bridge. It makes sense that you overcorrect with more words. Stopping mid-explanation feels socially risky. It feels like you're interrupting yourself. It feels like you're admitting you were wrong to speak the way you were speaking. And in high-status rooms, people fear looking uncertain more than they fear being wrong. So they keep going. They try to sound smooth. They try to talk their way back to stability. But stability doesn't come from smoothness. It comes from spine. And a spine is short. Psychology reveal. Here's the hidden psychology of repair. When you're over-explaining, you're not actually trying to inform the room. You're trying to regulate your own nervous system. You're using words as sedation. So the repair move isn't just a communication technique. It's a nervous system reset. You have to interrupt the panic pattern without making it dramatic. And the cleanest way to do that is a phrase that signals compression and returns control to structure. Not, "Sorry." Not, "I'm rambling." Not, "Let me start over." Those weaken you. The repair phrase is something like, "Let me simplify." Or, "Here's the headline." Or, "Bottom line." Those phrases don't confess weakness. They signal leadership. They tell the room, you're in control of the narrative. And then you deliver one sentence that reestablishes standards, boundaries, and conditions. Cinematic scenario. Picture this: you're in a high-status meeting with a senior leader who rarely interrupts, until they do. The room is quiet enough that you can hear your own breath when you stop talking. People's faces are neutral in that polished way that makes you hyper-aware of every micro-expression. You're presenting a decision. You start clean. We're moving forward with option A because it protects the deadline while keeping execution controllable. You stop. So far, solid. Then someone asks an innocent question, a probe dressed as curiosity. Did you run that by anyone? You feel the hook. Your body reacts. And you make the mistake. You start listing names, context, conversations. Yeah, so we spoke with Team B informally, and we also had conversations with stakeholder X, and the reason we didn't do a formal review is because. You hear the first, because, then another. Your voice speeds up. You add more detail. And also last quarter, we saw delays, and we didn't want to. Then, mid-sentence, you catch it. You see it in the room. The senior leader leans back slightly. Someone stops typing. The person who asked the question wears that polite, satisfied expression. And your stomach drops because you realize you're already in the old frame. This is where most people either keep digging or freeze. Here's the repair move. You don't apologize. You don't explain why you were explaining. You cut cleanly, without abruptness. You say, "Let me simplify." Silence. 2 seconds. Then you deliver the headline in 1 sentence. I made the decision with the stakeholders who own the dependency, and the plan contains rollback triggers if the dependency slips. Stop. Now watch the room. The senior leader's posture shifts forward slightly. Because you just did something high status, you compressed without shame. The person who asked tries to reopen the trial. Okay, but who specifically? You don't go back into name listing like a defendant. You answer at the correct altitude. The owners of the dependency and metric. If you need names for accountability, I'll send them after. Stop. Now the conversation moves back to execution. Because you restored frame. You didn't win. You didn't embarrass anyone. You simply reclaimed the structure of the conversation. Aftermath, the meeting continues, and you are no longer bleeding authority through nervous detail. Tactical breakdown. Here's the repair protocol you can use in real time. Step 1, detect the slip early. The earliest signs. Your voice speeds up. You start stacking clauses. Because appears repeatedly. You start name listing. You're answering objections nobody asked. The moment you notice it, don't panic. Noticing is success. Step 2, use a compression cue. Choose one phrase and make it yours. Let me simplify. Here's the headline. Bottom line. The core point is this. Say it calmly. No apology in the tone. Step 3, deliver a one-sentence spine. Decision plus standard plus boundary/condition. Example. Decision is option, standard is deadline plus controllability. Boundary is rollback if X happens. You can speak it in normal language. We're doing it because it protects the deadline. If dependency slips, we roll back within 24 hours. Stop. Step 4, redirect questions to criteria. If people keep fishing, use the one-question move. Which concern are you pointing to, risk, timeline, or accountability? Now they have to be specific. Step 5, don't repair by confessing. Avoid. Sorry, I'm rambling. I'm not explaining this well. Let me start over. Those may be honest, but in high-status rooms they often read as self-demotion. Your job is to compress, not self-flagellate. Common mistake versus power correction. Mistake, trying to fix over-explaining with more explaining. Correction, compressing back to standards and conditions without apology. Dark layer and nuance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people will intentionally bait you into over-explaining. They ask questions that pull you into details so they can reframe you as anxious, verbose, or uncertain. If you can repair cleanly, the bait loses power. But ethically, don't use this repair to hide weak decisions. If the decision is weak, you own it. We don't have the data yet. Here's what we need by tomorrow to decide. That's still a repair. It's still high status. Because it's truthful and structured. The point is not to look good. The point is to remain stable and honest under pressure. And once you can recover mid-meeting, the final layer becomes possible. Because now we're not just talking about language and tactics. We're talking about identity. The kind of person who stops chasing approval with words, who can stand in high-status rooms without turning them into courtrooms in their mind. Ready for next section. 15. Identity shift. You become a person whose words don't chase approval. There's a moment you can feel coming before it arrives. It's the moment right before you speak in a high-status room, when the room is quiet, eyes are on you, and your body decides whether this is a conversation or a trial. For most people, the trial starts internally. Not because anyone is attacking them, Because they've learned to treat attention as danger. They've learned that if someone higher status is watching, you have to earn the right to exist in that space. So you prepare your words like armor. You build explanations in advance, not to communicate, but to protect yourself from being lowered. And over time, you don't even notice you're doing it. It feels normal. It feels like professionalism. It feels like being thorough. But deep down, it's something else. It's approval chasing disguised as clarity. And the identity shift, the real one, the kind that changes how people experience you, is when your words stop doing that job. When your words stop chasing approval. When your sentences stop being bids for safety. And become what they're supposed to be. Tools for decisions. Tools for alignment. Tools for reality. This is where rule number 1 stops being a tactic and becomes a posture. Because if you only apply these moves as techniques, you'll sound practiced but not powerful. Power isn't the sentence. Power is the nervous system behind the sentence. The calm that says, my legitimacy isn't purchased through explanation. It's established through standards and ownership. Recognition hook. Think back to a time you left a meeting and replayed it like a crime scene. Every sentence. Every tone shift. Every moment you should have said it differently. You can feel it, the meeting ends, and your body is still in it. Your mind keeps looping, trying to rewrite your performance into something that would have earned more respect. And underneath the loop is a quiet ache. Why did I have to fight so hard just to be seen as competent? That loop is not about the meeting. It's about identity. It's about the part of you that believes your value depends on being interpreted correctly. And that belief is what makes you explain. Because explanation feels like control. But control is not the same as authority. Authority is the ability to remain yourself under scrutiny. Validation bridge. It makes sense that you chase approval with words. You learned it somewhere. Maybe in a workplace where being misunderstood meant being blamed. Maybe in a family where you had to justify yourself to be safe. Maybe in a school system where you were rewarded for showing your work and punished for skipping steps. So you became good at reasoning out loud. You became good at explaining. You became good at making yourself legible. And those are real strengths. But in high-status rooms, those strengths can become a trap if they're powered by fear. Because fear makes you donate your authority before anyone even asks for it. So the shift isn't talk less. The shift is, stop using language to manage your worth. Psychology reveal. Here's the simplest description of what changes. Before, you treat the room like a court, and you speak like a defendant. After, you treat the room like a control room, and you speak like an operator. A defendant tries to convince. An operator executes. An operator uses standards. An operator uses conditions. An operator owns outcomes. An operator doesn't need to be liked to be credible. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become less reactive. And the most noticeable sign of that identity shift isn't what you say. It's what you don't do anymore. You don't pre-apologize. You don't overqualify. You don't fill silence. You don't rescue other people's discomfort. You don't narrate your innocence. You don't argue inside someone else's premise. You simply hold a stable frame and invite real trade-offs. That stability is intoxicating in high-status rooms because it's rare. And it makes people trust you, not because you performed confidence, but because you stopped leaking insecurity. Cinematic scenario. Picture this: you're walking into a meeting you used to dread. Not because people are cruel, because the room's status density is high. The kind of meeting where one wrong sentence can cost you social positioning for months. You step into the room and feel the familiar sensory cues. The cool air. The clean light. The chairs arranged like a hierarchy. The quiet before speaking. You sit down. You open your laptop. You feel that old habit trying to start its engine. Prepare the story. Prepare the justifications. Prepare the defenses. But something is different now. You notice the habit without obeying it. You feel the tension in your chest and you don't treat it like a command. You treat it like weather. The meeting begins. A senior leader asks you a question that used to hook you. Why are we doing it this way? And you feel the reflex rise, your body still knows the old script. But you don't enter it. You answer in owner format. We're doing it this way because it protects the deadline while keeping execution controllable. Stop. Silence. In the old silence would have triggered more words, extra context, added justifications, tone softening. But now you hold it. Calmly. Not as a power play. As punctuation. The senior leader says, "What if it fails?" You answer with boundaries and conditions. If it fails, we roll back within 24 hours. Rollback triggers are X and Y. Stop. Someone else tries to smuggle a premise. So why did you decide to take that risk? Old you would have defended the word risk. New you refuses the premise calmly. I wouldn't frame it as taking a risk. It's staying within our reliability boundary. Stop. The room shifts. Not because you're aggressive. Because you're unmovable without being rigid. They ask, who approved this? Old you would have name-listed to prove legitimacy. New you answers at the right altitude. I own the decision. Approvals are for dependency points. Team B hasn't signed off, so our plan assumes worst case and contains rollback. Stop. And now the room is doing what it should have been doing all along. Asking real questions. Refining trade-offs. Making decisions. Because you stopped making the meeting about your worth. Aftermath. You leave the room and something else happens that's almost more important. You don't replay it like a crime scene. You don't rewrite your sentences in your head at night. Because you didn't perform. You operated. An operation doesn't require self-punishment afterward. That's the identity shift. Tactical integration, the new default. Here's how the full system integrates into a simple internal protocol you can run without thinking. 1. Standard first. Start with decision plus standard. 2. Silence as punctuation. Stop. Hold. 3. Questions as frame control. Use one question to force criteria when pressured. 4. Premise refusal. I wouldn't frame it that way. Restate standard. 5. Conditions over excuses. If X changes, we revisit. 6. Repair by compression. Let me simplify. One sentence spine. If you can do these 6, you don't need tricks. You will feel different in those rooms. And people will experience you as different. Dark layer and nuance. Here's the last uncomfortable truth. Some people will not like this version of you. Not because you're wrong. Because the old version of you was easier to control. If your identity used to be the helpful explainer, people who relied on your labor will feel the absence. If your identity used to be the one who over-justifies, people who enjoyed the power of evaluating you will feel deprived. They may call you less collaborative. They may say you're not as transparent. They may push for your old behaviors. That's not evidence you're doing it wrong. That's evidence the relationship dynamic changed. Your ethical task is to remain warm while staying structured. To clarify when needed without pleading. To collaborate without auditioning. Because the goal was never to dominate the room. The goal was to stop letting the room dominate your nervous system. And once you stop chasing approval with words, something surprising happens. You become easier to follow. Not because you're louder. Because you're clear. And clear people, under pressure, feel like safety. Ready for next section.